Story 1.
Husband discovers overwhelming evidence of wife's infidelity, exposing the depth of her cheating. I've been driving for the past 2 hours to the Marriott in Baltimore, where my wife is attending a conference. The plan was to surprise her by dropping in and taking her out for dinner. Yeah, right. Over the last 3 months, I've had suspicions that my wife, Megan, might be having an affair with a coworker. Every time she went on a business trip, training session, or conference, it seemed she was getting back later than expected. Tonight, I aim to catch her in the act and bring it all to an end. Megan and I have been married for 14 years, with 2 beautiful children, 12-year-old Sarah and 10-year-old Todd, currently staying with my mother. We got married right out of high school after dating during the last 2 years. Megan, with her long brown hair, slender figure, and strong facial features, was always bright and cheerful. Until about 3 months ago, I thought we had a strong marriage, but little things made me uneasy. I hesitated to confront her, fearing I'd appear paranoid or jealous. The conference that day was conveniently close, giving me the chance to drop in unexpectedly and potentially catch her in the act. At the hotel counter, I handed over my suit bag and introduced myself as Phil Jenkins. My wife, Megan, was attending the insurance conference in room 214, and she had informed me that I could pick up a key there. After confirming my identity, the clerk handed me the key, and I nervously made my way to the elevator. Questions raced through my mind about what to do when I caught her, how to approach the situation, whether to knock or walk in, and if she would be alone with the safety latch on. As I walked down the hall, I decided to use the key to open the door and see what happened next. Trying to be quiet, I unlocked the door, swung it open, and found Megan at a desk with her briefcase open, doing paperwork. She turned around with a gasp and expressed surprise at my unexpected presence. I explained that I had some spare time and thought I would drop in to take her to supper. Megan welcomed the idea and assumed I would be staying the night, expressing a desire for some company. Walking over, she gave me a big kiss. Realizing that my plan to catch her cheating had failed, I jokingly inquired about having a quick moment before dinner. Megan suggested a carnal gesture before her shower, promising a night of whatever I wanted afterward. Relieved that my suspicions were unfounded, I was glad I hadn't lost the woman I loved. We shared a brief carnal session, and with a big grin, Megan headed into the bathroom for her shower. I gathered myself and took a seat on the bed. Megan's toiletry case sat on the dresser, prompting me to check for aspirin to alleviate my driving-induced headache. No pills were found, but in the side pocket, something odd caught my eye. Slowly, I retrieved a pack of 6 contraceptives from the case. Holding them in my hand as I sat on the bed, I recalled that after Todd's birth, Megan switched to birth control pills that made her nauseous, leading to my vasectomy. Since then, we had abandoned contraception, enjoying the freedom from contraceptives or pills. Now the question arose, why were these contraceptives in her toiletry case? I'm not foolish. Swiftly concluding that my wonderful wife was indeed cheating, I felt uncertain about what to do next. Rummaging through her case, I found safety pins kept for clothing emergencies. Taking one, I carefully punctured a hole through the middle of each contraceptive, replacing them as I found them. While Megan was still in the shower, I contacted a friend at home. I informed Freddie that I needed him to do a favor for me, and he agreed without hesitation. I asked him to wait about an hour and then call me on my cell, explaining that a pipe had burst at the school and I needed to return urgently. I assured him that he just needed to make the call, as I would handle the rest. Freddie acknowledged the plan and promised to call around 7. Deciding I didn't want to spend the night with my wife, I regretted our previous actions and wished to avoid further complications. I would ponder on the drive home, aware that I had to take some action, though uncertain about what. As Megan emerged from the shower, I struggled to restrain myself from confronting her, burning up inside with a desire to retaliate against the woman who was my wife. I'm not a violent man, usually keeping my temper in check. I realized it was better not to let her know about my awareness of her infidelity. By the time we reached the dining room, I was thoroughly depressed. I suggested that Megan could order anything she wanted, as it was on me. She responded that she wasn't very hungry and decided on a small fillet, suggesting a bottle of rose to go with it. After placing the order, I couldn't resist probing a bit. I asked Megan if she was happy with our marriage, to which she replied affirmatively. She mentioned having a nice home, 2 great kids, and a husband who loves her, expressing that she couldn't ask for more. I shared my occasional doubts about whether I was doing everything to keep her happy, expressing my feelings of luck to have such a fabulous wife and how I had to pinch myself to believe it was real. Megan reassured me, calling me a silly goose and acknowledging that's why I had driven all the way down to see her. She expressed that she didn't think I had anything to worry about, as she was happy and content and believed I was doing all the right things. She added that a woman couldn't ask for a better husband. Our dinners arrived, and we engaged in small talk throughout the meal. As plates were being cleared, my cell phone rang. I excused myself to the lobby to avoid disturbing other diners and waited a few minutes before returning. I explained that my friend Freddie had called, informing me about a water pipe breaking at the school. I apologized and mentioned that I really had to get back there as soon as I could, resulting in the cancellation of our planned night together. Megan's face displayed a look of disappointment, but I couldn't discern the authenticity of her emotions. It seemed that whether I stayed or left didn't matter to her, as one way or another, she was going to face consequences. While boarding the elevator, Kirk Langford disembarked and greeted Megan, mentioning that he had stopped by the room for supper but received no answer. He extended his hand, introduced himself as Kirk Langford, and expressed that Megan talks about me all the time. I explained that I had come down for the night but had to return due to an emergency, and it was challenging to shake hands and feign a pleasant smile. As we rode up in the elevator, I addressed the nagging issue again with Megan, expressing my desire for her to quit her job and my discomfort with her working with Kirk. I emphasized that we had discussed this before, and it was crucial to me. Megan responded that she had no intention of quitting, enjoying her job and learning a lot from Kirk. She suggested that I needed to overcome my paranoia about Kirk and her. After a quick kiss in the room, I picked up my bags and left for the trip home. The entire journey home, I couldn't shake the thought of Kirk stopping by Megan's room after supper. By the time I reached the house, I was a wreck. I had developed hatred towards my wife for her actions. I wished I were adept at devising ways to catch cheating spouses, but I was dumbfounded. What could I do? I couldn't even figure out how to avoid closeness with her. Divorce was what I truly wanted, but lacking sufficient evidence left me defeated. My wife was unfaithful, and I knew it but couldn't take any action. Unwilling to endure it, I sought help. 2 days later, Megan returned home with a gleeful demeanor, infuriating me further. Checking her bag, I found one contraceptive remaining, still with a hole. Saturday brought the Globies Insurance Company picnic, providing some enjoyment for the kids. I wasn't looking forward to the day, suspecting some colleagues were aware of the situation. I felt somewhat exposed, trying to keep a low profile to avoid becoming the target of crude jokes. Perhaps I was a bit paranoid, but I couldn't help it. Megan enjoyed herself, socializing with Kirk and others, and although they weren't engaged in any carnal gestures, they were undeniably close. Being ignored suited me fine. A woman named Janet Langford introduced herself and expressed that I must be Phil Jenkins. She was stunning, and I found myself genuinely confused. While I thought highly of my wife and loved her, Janet Langford resembled a pinup model with long auburn hair and big blue eyes. Despite her being a little short, her perfect body left me wondering why Kirk would cheat on someone like her. After exchanging pleasantries, we agreed to find a quieter place to talk. We settled on some benches about 100 yards from the picnic area, sitting by the lake. I offered to listen to whatever Janet wanted to discuss. She hesitated, expressing difficulty in bringing up a delicate subject. At that point, I knew she was aware of the affair. I decided to make it easier for her by mentioning that I had just found out about it that week. Janet seemed relieved and shared that she had known for about 2 months. She explained her plans to have divorce papers served and revealed that she had hired a detective to gather proof. Her lawyer had advised that Megan's willingness to testify or sign a notarized statement about the affair would strengthen her case. I inquired about the type of proof, and Janet mentioned having photos and taped phone conversations. Although she didn't have videos yet, she believed the photos were compelling. She also had times and dates that could be used as evidence. Janet expressed her willingness to work on it and asked if my lawyer could help her with the same divorce papers, using some of the evidence I had. She emphasized her lack of proof and mentioned her appreciation for any assistance I could provide. I'm also taking legal action against Globies. I possess statements confirming that specific management-level company officials were aware of the affair and took no action to stop it. They face a choice: terminate both individuals involved or confront a $1 million lawsuit. Impressive, right? Kirk is playing golf tomorrow morning. Can you come over to the house around mid-morning? You should be gone until late afternoon. I can show you what I have and we can figure out if there is anything we can do. I reside at 26 Hemlock Avenue in Crestmont. Okay, it's a plan. Not really a date, but you know what I mean. We both chuckled a little. I felt at ease with her. We walked back up to the picnic area, and no one noticed our absence. I felt much better about things. Maybe this whole mess could be resolved. I sure hope so. As expected, the next morning, Megan informed me she had some shopping to do and would be gone for a couple of hours. After she left, I dropped the kids off at my mom's and headed to Crestmont. Janet greeted me at the door, and we entered the den. A nice leather couch adorned the room, and on the table in front of it was a large computer monitor displaying an image of an empty motel room. She gestured for me to sit down and offered beer, soda, or wine. I chose regular soda, specifically Pepsi. I asked Janet to share what was going on. Janet explained that in a few minutes we would be watching her husband play a round of golf, live and in full color. She anticipated that I might recognize the caddy accompanying Kirk. When I questioned how she arranged this, Janet disclosed that it cost her $1,400 to set everything up, and Kirk would cover the expenses. She expected the session to last about 2 hours, so she encouraged me to get comfortable. She mentioned having popcorn and nachos and added that she would obtain a DVD of the entire session, gladly providing me with a copy. While she admitted not wanting to see the events unfold, she also expressed that she wouldn't miss it for the world, declaring, "Let the show begin." We engaged in small talk for about 20 minutes, during which Janet shared the information she had collected about the affair, including photos, tapes, and documents. The details she provided left me both amazed and crushed, confirming Megan's actions. Surprisingly, Janet revealed having 3 large koi ponds in the backyard. I expressed interest in bringing the children over to see them, and she seemed pleased. Just then, the monitor showed activity, and as predicted by Janet, Kirk and Megan entered the room, immediately undressing without engaging in small talk or foreplay. The video was clear, though the sound was a bit garbled. I felt uneasy watching my wife and her husband engaging in carnal activities with a stranger on the couch. Janet remarked, "Wow, you don't see a body like that very often." I managed to smile but didn't know how to respond. In fact, watching my wife in that situation left me speechless. The experience became increasingly uncomfortable. I finally addressed Janet, expressing my discomfort and asking if we had to watch all of it. I assumed she wasn't interested in continuing to watch either. Janet confirmed that she wasn't really interested, and we decided to discontinue the viewing. To be honest, witnessing my wife engage in carnal activities with another man is somewhat unpleasant, and I feel a bit uneasy watching it with you beside me. However, the entire event is being recorded, which is all we need for the lawyers, and we don't necessarily have to watch it. I can't say I derive any enjoyment from it, and the plot seems quite predictable. Are you planning to head home or something? Well, actually, I was hoping you could show me your koi ponds. I think that would be much more interesting than 2 hours of huffing and puffing. Her eyes lit up, simply because I had shown an interest in her hobby. As we walked to the back of the house, Megan reached her first climax, and I couldn't help but think I was going to have a more enjoyable afternoon than my wife. The 3 fish ponds were fantastic, and I was particularly intrigued by the pumping and filter systems, given my background as a plumber before working at the school. Kirk didn't assist her with her hobby at all, and she had to hire people for pipe or pump work. I offered to help her anytime Kirk was playing golf. Not with any romantic intentions, but simply to learn more about the koi ponds. Spending time with her was an added bonus. After a few quickly passing hours, we returned to the house. The motel room was empty, signaling it was time for me to go home. Janet promised to call when Kirk had another golf game so I could visit with Sarah and Todd. The next few weeks were challenging. Each time Megan took a shower, I would check her bag to find a new supply of contraceptives. I couldn't fathom when she found the time to use them all. I kept a safety pin on my keychain, ready to puncture them. Any day now, I anticipated Megan might have to make a surprise visit to her sister. On evenings following Kirk's golf games, the kids would excitedly recount their visit to the koi lady, showing Megan pictures of the fish they drew and sharing the names they gave them. She never connected Kirk's wife to the koi lady and seemed relieved that I could keep the kids occupied while she was otherwise engaged. I made 2 more attempts to persuade her to quit her job and end the involvement with Kirk. Both times I received the same rejection, with the second one being particularly unpleasant. I also started making excuses to avoid closeness with her, and she responded with digs about my masculinity. It stung a bit, but it made everything I was doing easier to justify. Finally, on a Tuesday night, she dropped a bombshell. Expressing that she had been feeling really stressed lately, Megan suggested taking a few days off from work to visit her sister for about a week. She acknowledged my efforts with overtime and late nights and thought it would be a good idea for me to relax while she was away. Megan believed that a trip to my sister's would be much better than spending a year with a shrink. She encouraged me to have a good time, assuring that she would take care of everything. Megan was glad that I understood the necessity of the extra work for the good of the family, but expressed a concern that she might have overdone it. I struggled to sleep that night, preoccupied with the tasks awaiting me the next day. I was relieved that the moment had finally come. Megan's sister Nancy and her husband Brad lived about 3 hours away. Brad, while an okay guy, could be a real idiot, especially when Nancy called the shots. Interestingly, their town had 2 termination clinics, and I had gathered the names, addresses, and operating hours for both. I even familiarized myself with the terms of agreement required for services at each clinic, noting the 2-day cooling-off period they both mandated. Assuming Megan's first appointment was on Wednesday, the earliest she could schedule the procedure was Friday, giving her a few recovery days before returning home. This provided me with a day and a half to finalize my plans, which seemed manageable. After Megan embarked on her rest and recuperation trip, I began making preparations. I had to explain the situation to my parents, acknowledging my failure as a husband. They understood and offered their support. The kids enjoyed their time with my parents, and Dad's truck would be useful for moving Megan's belongings. The lawyer would have all the necessary paperwork ready for me on Thursday morning. Janet's paperwork was also prepared, and she planned to serve Kirk simultaneously with my serving Megan. The only internal struggle I faced was whether to give Megan one last chance to make amends, though I held little hope. Dad and I spent the rest of the day packing Megan's things. On Thursday morning, after a 3-hour drive, I reached the first clinic, only to face disappointment. This left me with one more option, the Family Planning Center. Approaching the receptionist with all the confidence I could muster, I explained that I was Phil Jenkins and that my wife, Megan, had instructed me to come and sign a consensual agreement form. When the receptionist inquired about the form specifics, I admitted not knowing the exact name but mentioned that it was a form stating I understood everything, agreed with it, and wouldn't pursue legal action. The receptionist confirmed Megan's identity and mentioned that her sister had signed for her, but my signature would be better. She checked the computer for a few seconds, then retrieved the file. I seized the opportunity and signed the form just below Nancy's signature, noticing that the procedure was scheduled for Friday morning at 11:00 a.m., with the requirement to be there an hour early. I inquired about any remaining payments. I took out my checkbook and placed it on the counter. The receptionist assured me that Megan had already paid the full amount of $800 in cash, and there was nothing else due at that time. I expressed my gratitude for her help and mentioned that it made the process a lot easier. The reception I received upon arriving at Nancy and Brad's place was overwhelmingly insincere, bordering on comical. Megan initiated the conversation, expressing surprise at my presence and asking what I was doing there. I responded by explaining that Mom and Dad wanted to keep the kids for a few days, so I took some sick leave and decided to visit them. I mentioned that I needed to unwind a little too. The room fell somewhat silent, and I sensed the wheels turning in everyone's heads. I had put them on the spot, and now they had to find a way out of it. I observed Nancy nod to Brad, signaling him to join her in the kitchen. Megan engaged in casual conversation about various topics. After a few minutes, Brad returned to the room with a suggestion. He proposed taking the day off the next day, borrowing his buddy Jack's bass boat, and spending the day on the lake to ensure we wouldn't be bothering the ladies. I agreed, expressing that a day drifting on the lake would make all my worries disappear. I suggested checking if Jack could join us, and Brad agreed to get everything set up. Everyone seemed relieved with how things unfolded. We had an uneventful dinner and spent the rest of the evening chatting about various topics. However, there was no closeness that night, as Megan didn't want her sister to overhear. Early the next morning, Jack was waiting with the boat, and Brad prepared lunch while stocking the cooler with beer. We engaged in conversation while loading the truck and the boat. Brad asked if I was getting into the truck as I stood by the passenger's door. I informed him that I had decided not to go and suggested that he make the most of the day because facing Nancy for the next few hours wouldn't be pleasant. Brad spent about 5 minutes trying to persuade me to go until I had to get firm. After a couple of well-placed swear words and some physical threats, Jack and Brad took off. I went inside, poured myself coffee, and turned off Nancy's cell phone. Then I called my dad, who was always up early. We chatted for about 2 hours, ignoring the constant call-waiting tones. Brad must have tried reaching Nancy for hours. As Nancy and Megan got up, I said goodbye to my father and braced for the impending confrontation. I cleared the missed calls on the landline and turned Nancy's cell phone back on. In less than 2 hours, Megan and Nancy needed to be at the Family Planning Center in about 5 minutes. I would face 2 furious women. I finished the first pot of coffee, so I brewed a new one for my wife and her sister. Megan exclaimed, questioning why I was there. I explained that I wasn't in the mood for fishing, so I decided to stick around with them for the day. I suggested finding a nice place for lunch together, mentioning that I had to leave that night and didn't want to spend the day with Brad and Jack on a boat. Megan rejected the idea, stating that she and Nancy had plans for the day and preferred to go by themselves. She emphasized that she could go out with me any time, but she only got to see Nancy a couple of times a year. Additionally, she pointed out that I would be there all week. I tried to convince Megan, expressing that she could spare me at least half a day since I had driven all the way down there. I suggested she could have the rest of the week for her sisterly activities. Nancy left the room, dialing a number on her cell phone. Megan sat in a chair, appearing defeated as if pounded by a truck. We could hear Nancy screaming at Brad over the phone as if he had committed the crime of the century. I felt sorry for the guy, but he married her. Megan expressed that she and Nancy didn't want me tagging along for the day, emphasizing that they had their plans set and it didn't include me. I agreed to hear their plans for the day and decide whether I was interested or would find something else to occupy my time. I expressed my confusion about the situation since they had the entire week and I only had that day. I jokingly asked if they were meeting some guys. Megan clarified that they weren't meeting any guys, but planned to do some shopping for carnal items like bras, underwear, and hot nightgowns. She explained that these were items they didn't want guys around gawking at while they were trying them on. I suggested that most of those shops were in the mall and I could keep myself busy doing other things while they used the dressing rooms. I offered to tag along and stay out of their way, assuring them that they wouldn't have to worry about entertaining me during lunch. I promised to take them to someplace fancy to make up for the trouble I caused. At that moment, Nancy stood in the doorway, glaring at me without saying a word. Megan could see that she wasn't going to be able to reason with me and seemed ready to give up. Both were still in their housecoats, and eventually, Megan stood up. Megan stated that she had to go get dressed and left the room. Nancy, looking at me, called me a real bonehead before following Megan upstairs. About 20 minutes later, the light on the landline phone illuminated, indicating someone upstairs was making a call. The clock was ticking, and they had an hour to get to the center. I considered my next move if they tried to leave without me, planning to follow them and make sure they knew it. However, I didn't believe they would attempt that. After 20 minutes, both of them came down the stairs. Megan informed me that it was time to go shopping, adding a bit of an attitude. Surprisingly, it was a bit easier than I thought it would be. I speculated that the upstairs phone call was likely to the family planning center, possibly to reschedule the appointment. Since I said I was leaving that night, they probably figured the best way around. The problem was to just wait until I left. I wasn't trying to stop Megan from getting the termination, but I wanted to make it more difficult for her. I insisted on taking my car because I wanted to drive. I didn't want them ditching me somewhere a few miles from the house. I pulled into a service station. I filled up the gas tank, checked the oil and water, and cleaned the windshield. It was the most time I ever spent servicing my car. They both just sat, fuming. When we arrived at the mall, I parked far out so we'd have a good walk. Once we were in the mall, I pretty much left them alone. I kept an eye on them but really could care less about what they were doing or buying. They didn't seem to be having any fun. They spent most of the time talking to each other and making gestures. They bought a few things just to show me they had been shopping. I tried to stay hidden but still keep them in sight. There was definitely some serious discussion going on. The time for the appointment passed. I had succeeded in delaying the inevitable. I knew she was still going to get the procedure, so I had no intention of interfering any further. Shortly after noon, they came back to the center court of the mall where I said I would meet them. We went to the Olive Garden for lunch and got back to the house around 2 p.m. There wasn't much conversation during lunch or on the drive home. I was smiling to myself the whole time. I knew these two were upset with me right now, and I didn't care. What a wonderful feeling. I grabbed a beer and relaxed on the sofa. Brad finally arrived, and for about 30 minutes, Nancy verbally berated him. He managed to slip out and disappeared for a couple of hours, returning by supper time. After the girls finished cleaning up, I requested a private conversation with Megan in the kitchen. Nancy sneered, and they both went into the living room. Megan remained upset due to the earlier events, and I sensed she wouldn't be easy to deal with. I got straight to the point, expressing my desire for her to quit her job and stop seeing Kirk Langford. Her teeth clenched tightly, and she struggled to refrain from hitting me. She insisted that she didn't want to hear that again, expressing her frustration with me bringing it up repeatedly. Megan refused to waste her time answering me, stating that I already knew the answer and it wouldn't change. She gave me the ultimatum to either change the topic or leave. I reached into the manila envelope by the chair and pulled out a legal-sized envelope. I explained that I had asked her at least 10 times in the last 2 months, and each time she refused. I presented the divorce papers, suggesting she sign them and mail them in. I mentioned that there was a self-addressed stamped envelope included, and if she wanted a lawyer to look them over, she was welcome to do so. She glared at me and leaned across the table, expressing frustration. She stated that I couldn't divorce her just because she wouldn't quit her job or have the friends I wanted her to have. Megan insisted that for a divorce, there needed to be grounds, and I didn't have any. She suggested it was time for me to go home and get my act together. She emphasized that she was my wife and had no intention of giving up her home and family just because I didn't like where she worked. I responded by reaching into my manila envelope and bringing out a stack of photos. I placed 6 pictures of Megan with Kirk on the table and asked if she had lovemaking with him. There was no answer. As I placed another 6 pictures of them in various positions on the table, she started screaming at me, urging me to stop. I acknowledged her reaction, understanding that she perceived my actions as spying. She criticized me, calling me a sneaky person and expressing disdain for my approach. She questioned why I didn't address the situation directly and accused me of behaving like a pervert, stating that my complaining made her sick. At that moment, my cell phone rang and I answered it, learning that my dad would arrive in 10 minutes with Megan's belongings to Nancy's place. As I hung up, she asked about the call. I informed her that my dad was bringing her stuff to Nancy's place, explaining that the locks had been changed at our house. I offered to retrieve any forgotten items if she let me know. She remained silent as I handed her the title to her car, mentioning that I had signed it over to her. In an envelope, I included half of the money from our bank accounts, approximately $200. I outlined arrangements for her to have visitation rights with the kids once a week, with the possibility of an overnight stay monthly if she made a statement attesting to the affair and had it notarized. I added that I had a DVD from the May 10th visit she and Kirk made to the Scandia Motel, which was 2 hours long and captured everything depicted in the pictures. As I collected the photos, I clarified that I hadn't taken any of these. I wasn't concerned about her activities, I just didn't appreciate being deceived. Lastly, I'd like you to have this keepsake from our love. I removed the safety pin from my keychain and slid it across the table. I revealed the pin to Megan, explaining that I had used it to poke holes in all of our contraceptives for the past 2 months. I mentioned that she had used 48 rubbers in the last 2 weeks alone, and Kirk had been more fortunate than I ever dreamed of being. She responded with anger, calling me a miserable weasel and deeming my actions the most despicable thing she had ever heard of. I retorted, stating that the most despicable thing was having an affair with someone outside of our marriage. I acknowledged that I might be considered a fool, but she was a cheating partner. I informed her that I had to run, as my dad had just pulled up in the driveway. I noted that she never apologized or expressed remorse for her actions. As I left, I told her goodbye and wished her well with her termination on Monday. She finally started crying as I left the room. Nancy rushed in to comfort her, and Brad followed me out to the front porch. Brad questioned my actions, stating that I couldn't throw away a 14-year marriage over a misunderstanding. I challenged him, asking why my wife had come down to visit him and Nancy. Brad looked down at his feet for a few seconds, seemingly thinking. Eventually, he apologized and offered to help me unload the truck. We finished unloading in about 10 minutes while Megan continued crying in the kitchen. I didn't know what she was crying about, and frankly, I didn't care. Kirk and Megan were both fired from Globies the next week. Megan refused to sign an affidavit, but the lawyer said he had a strong enough case without it. I didn't hear from my loving wife at all after that night. She did not come to see the children. They didn't seem to mind because they were forming a good bond with Janet. We spent a lot of time together as a family. Mostly, there was no lovemaking or even talk of it. We were not going to do anything that might jeopardize the divorces. The kids and I were learning a lot about Koi, having a great time doing it. At last, after 4 months, both divorces were final. Megan never fought hers, but Kirk went down kicking and screaming. He lost the house, all the investments, and ended up having to pay a large monthly alimony payment. A few days before Christmas, Megan came to the house with presents for the kids. I was polite and didn't do anything to ruin the holiday spirit. She stayed for about 2 hours, and then left as quietly as she came. Nothing was said between us about the divorce or the affair. I put the house up for sale, and 2 months later we moved in with Janet. Kirk took a job in Omaha and Megan went with him. 4 months later, Kirk disappeared and didn't tell her where he was going. Megan moved back in with Nancy after Brad left for a job on the Alaskan pipeline. 2 months later, Nancy received divorce papers in the mail. The two sisters are good company for each other. Janet and I are comfortable with each other. She adores the kids, and they feel the same way about her. We are planning on getting married in June and spend every moment we can practicing for the honeymoon. Second story, we needed to have a serious conversation, no doubt about that. As I looked up at the woman who had been my wife for more than 2 decades, it was evident that the last few years had changed the dynamics between us. "It's over," she said, her voice strained, almost choking on the words. "Mike and I are no longer together." I nodded, offering my condolences as she stood there, hands nervously twisting together. She went on to share that nearly 3 years had passed since she promised that things would return to normal. I gently probed for the reasons behind the breakup. Gwen, avoiding eye contact, mentioned my growing unhappiness over the past few months. Familiarity had set in, and the magic spark had vanished. The situation struck a familiar chord. I couldn't help but recall a conversation from over 2 years ago when Gwen had dropped the bombshell about our lovemaking life becoming mundane and her taking a lover. A younger, more vigorous man. She made it clear that she intended to continue the affair, leaving me with an ultimatum: accept it or risk losing her, our home, our kids, and my job working for her father. To top it off, she even threatened me with domestic abuse charges. The memories flooded back, and the déjà vu was unsettling. Gwen reminded me that she had previously mentioned that the situation wouldn't last forever. She thanked me for my patience and understanding during that time. I responded with a nonchalant shrug, not offering much to the conversation. She continued outlining her plans for our future. She suggested that we could return to normal and I could move back into our bedroom whenever I wanted. She even proposed doing so right away, citing her emotional distress over Mike ending their relationship abruptly. Curious about Mike's actions, I inquired about what he had said. Gwen, sobbing, revealed that he had criticized her for aging, stating that she had gained too much weight. He expressed dissatisfaction with being seen with her and mentioned wanting someone younger in his life. I carefully commiserated, avoiding disagreement with Mike's judgment. I expressed reluctance to sleep in our bed again, considering the numerous times it had been used by Gwen and Mike. Gwen insisted that she never had Mike over when I was at home, referring to the times I was at work or away on business in France. She suggested getting rid of the old bed and buying a new one. The next day, I sarcastically mentioned that a new bed might be nice, and an awkward silence ensued. Eventually, Gwen enthusiastically promised to make it up to me, acknowledging that we hadn't been intimate for over 2 years. She assured me that things could easily return to how they used to be. I questioned if it could truly be the same, and Gwen, gaining confidence, affirmed that it could. She expressed optimism about us getting back to how things used to be. I questioned whether we could pick up from where we left off, considering the embarrassment I faced in front of our family and friends. I mentioned how I stopped going to the village pub to avoid seeing my friends, knowing that Gwen and Mike frequented it. Gwen apologized, acknowledging that her actions may have been thoughtless. She justified her behavior by stating that everyone knew about her affair with Mike. She hinted that my comparisons of Mike's prowess in bed to mine contributed to the situation. I reminded her of the hurtful comments relayed to me by their friends. She insisted that Mike wasn't better but just different and more exciting than our lovemaking life had become. Despite my understanding, I expressed reluctance to easily return to our bedroom, citing the damage to my male ego. Gwen suggested a weekend trip to Brighton, staying at a familiar hotel and driving my classic Jaguar XK 140. I commented on the difficulty of returning to our old carnal routine. I shocked her by revealing that I had sold the Jaguar a year ago, highlighting how little attention she had paid to my life. She was taken aback, expressing disbelief that I had sold the beloved car I had spent hours renovating. I informed her that we couldn't buy it back, and she suggested using money from the company or her trust to get another one. I declined, emphasizing that it wasn't for sale and questioning where the money would come from. I informed Gwen that she had signed away the trust money 5 months ago, explaining that the funds were used for our children's house deposits. She seemed surprised and asked if that was where the money came from. I responded, stating that I did inform her, including my decision to sell the Jaguar. I mentioned that she was preoccupied with her affair and the microphone during that time. Gwen inquired about the family company's financial status, and I confirmed that the company was fine but no longer owned by us. She seemed oblivious to the recent paperwork finalizing the deal. Desperate to understand our financial situation, Gwen asked about the sale of the business and whether we were still rich. I let her stew for a while, allowing her to reflect on the changes that occurred while she was engrossed in her affair with Mike. I then revealed that her share from the sale of the business would just about cover the mortgage on the house. Confused, she asked about the mortgage, indicating her detachment from financial matters. I clarified that I had spent my half on a 45 FT sailing yacht, as I had taken early retirement and planned to spend my days sailing the seas. Gwen expressed her dismay, stating her hatred for boats and the sea. I acknowledged her feelings but emphasized that there was no room for her on the boat anyway. She demanded an explanation, wondering why there wasn't enough room for her on such a large boat, seemingly reconsidering her dislike for the sea. I explained to Gwen that the sailboat was designed for just 2 people, including the deckhand I had hired recently. Despite this, she insisted that she could still accompany me, suggesting exploring the Mediterranean or sailing to the south of France, reminiscing about the enjoyable time she had there with Mike last year. I interjected, mentioning that there was only 1 cabin on the boat, more or less true. She loudly repeated her surprise about the single cabin and questioned the whereabouts of the deckhand. I revealed that the deckhand was a woman who had been sleeping with me for some time. Upon learning that the deckhand, Giselle, was a 28-year-old French blonde skilled in boat knowledge, cooking, and passionate in carnal matters, Gwen burst into tears. The next day, I left for France to join my boat and Giselle, leaving Gwen still sobbing. It took some time, but my plan was coming to fruition. I hadn't informed Gwen about the 6-bedroom villa I had purchased nearby with the money I had saved before selling the company. I looked forward to enjoying the pool and playful moments with Susie, who had a penchant for not wearing the top half of her bikini. I also anticipated the joy of opening the garage doors, where my old Jaguar XK140 had been sitting alone for too long. It would soon be taking Giselle and me to a familiar French restaurant down the coast. As for Mike, he experienced misfortune when he was mugged outside his favorite bar, suffering injuries including 5 broken ribs, busted kneecaps, and the loss of his purse and one of his testicles. It seemed the tables had turned, marking the end of his happy days.
Story 2.
I'm torn about whether I can bring myself to cause the pain I know I'm about to inflict on an innocent party who doesn't deserve what's about to happen in the next half hour or so. However, as I gaze at the large, meticulously framed photograph of me and Dave on our wedding day hanging above the mantel, my tearless eyes reflect the emotional toll of my mostly happy 28-year marriage. Those tears were shed during the internal debate on whether to proceed with this conversation. The verdict is yes, but I'm still resisting the urge to flee. Dave is going to be devastated. Seated beside me on the sofa, John gives my hand a reassuring squeeze, boosting my courage. I glance sideways at him and smile in gratitude. Over the 15 months of our affair, I've gradually fallen in love with him, and I'm aware that every bit of love I've given him has been taken directly from Dave. The moment it felt like cheating on John to make love to my husband marked the beginning of preparations for this meeting. I'm not looking forward to it, but I anticipate relief afterward. I'm going to hurt Dave profoundly, unavoidable as it may be. Yet once it's over, I can end the charade, pretending that I'm as deeply in love with Dave as he clearly is with me, pretending to go out with my girlfriends, on work trips, clothes shopping, all the while meeting up with John. It's incredibly stressful, and a significant factor in the worry lines increasingly visible on my face each morning. Yes, I look forward to the release. I glance at the bookcase, ensuring the baseball bat I discreetly placed there earlier is still in position. Dave's stance on fidelity is well known to me. Since the kids left home, he's been reading short stories about cheating wives facing consequences. Some of these stories surprised me with the husband's fierce reactions, making the wives pay dearly for their transgressions. When I questioned him, he simply mentioned colleagues who experienced upheavals in the no-fault family court system after sharing similar stories. Update. Dave, by nature, isn't a violent man, but when confronted by the person stealing his happiness and future, he might make an exception. He surpasses John in size, fitness, and strength, and is less sensitive. Holding a prominent position in a biomedical company, Dave contrasts sharply with John, an artist. Despite any provocation, I know Dave won't physically damage me, allowing me to keep him at bay so John can escape. I hear Dave's car in the driveway, and my stomach churns, heart pounding. I swallow, needing to steel myself. Deep breath. I wonder about his thoughts on the unfamiliar car, John's car. I sense that Dave must have read a similar scenario in a cheating story, the first one I ever read. My heart rate increases. I must stay calm. Dave walks in, eyeing John with curiosity. I stay seated, avoiding kissing Dave in front of John. Dave notices my omission and approaches with an outstretched hand. He introduces himself as Dave, and John hesitates before a brief handshake. Dave discreetly rubs his hand on his pants, a gesture I recognize after so many years. John retreats to the couch. Dave grabs a beer, sits opposite us, takes a pull, placing the can on the coffee table alongside our glasses. The tension makes my nerves feel on the verge of snapping, like a branch pushed beyond its limit. I can't meet Dave's questioning gaze. Instead, my eyes flit lower to his casual attire. When did he start coming home dressed so casually? I shake off inane questions about clothing. Now is the moment I've been dreading, where I shattered the soul of an outstanding community member, terrific father, provider, and nearly perfect husband. The first love of my life, but not the last. I admit that we need to talk to Dave. He responds with a neutral, unreadable expression, as expected in pressure situations. He remains coldly analytical, thinking on his feet better than I do. Despite preparing for every angle, my nerves betray me. I say to Dave that I want him to know he's done absolutely nothing wrong. My voice is shaky as I clear my throat, still unable to meet his eyes. Throughout all the years we've been together, my friends have been envious of our marriage. It should be acknowledged that Dave has been an exceptional husband. I laugh, but Dave doesn't reciprocate with a smile. Attempting to cushion the forthcoming blow, I admit my apprehension about discussing this with some friends, fearing they may not forgive me for causing Dave pain. Even as I focus my gaze over his shoulder, I notice no hint of a smile or softening in Dave's features. His lips move, but he resembles a statue. He questions if I'm going to hurt him, and the words are simple yet compelling, drawing my gaze to his. I finally meet his eyes, but his stare is firm and unyielding, as if studying something on a microscope slide, and it breaks the spell, making me look away, unnerved. I express my regret to Dave, explaining that I have fallen out of love with him and fallen in love with John. I want to hurt him as little as possible, but I need a divorce so John and I can be together. Pausing at this juncture now that the words are spoken, I try to discern any turmoil behind his mask, expecting to see something. A throbbing at his temple, wet eyes, tightly drawn lips, his fist clenching. Yet, there's nothing. His reaction, or rather his lack of it, terrifies me. I can't help but glance at the baseball bat. The silence between us is agonizing, unbearable. I have to fill it. My carefully prepared speech is a thing of the past. I explain that I didn't want to hurt him until I absolutely had to. I hope he sees that. John and I have been incredibly careful, not wanting him to find out until it was absolutely necessary, which is now. That meant limiting our time together. My concern for you, for your feelings, significantly restricted the occasions John and I could be together. Be together? Avoiding, you mean? I can't respond. I can't meet his gaze. I have no more lies left in me. I've exhausted them all. I can't lie to this man. Not anymore. I respect him too much, but I had hoped he wouldn't ask, wouldn't be so direct. His words make it all seem sordid. My lack of response is all the confirmation Dave needs. There doesn't seem to be anything left to say, or any point in apologizing again. I'm willing to hurt Dave. I know it. He knows it. Update. The room's atmosphere is dreadful, and I yearn to escape. The tension is nearly unbearable, and my nerves are so tightly strung that my skin prickles uncomfortably. While Dave isn't outwardly screaming in pain, I know him well enough to sense the internal turmoil. Anxiously, I wonder which of my anticipated responses from him will unfold. Regardless, I know it will be terrible. Something must break through for me to start my life with John. For what feels like an eternity, Dave stares at me until he acknowledges. Okay, Chelsea. My response is automatic and slips out before I can edit it. I question him, asking what he means by okay. I assume he wants a divorce so he can marry the other person. His tone remains patient, his expression bland and neutral. I sit back, too stunned to speak. This isn't one of the expected reactions, unexpected, out of left field, like a kick. I feel insulted. There are no questions, accusations, raised voice, red face, or tears. After 28 years together, my husband isn't going to spend even 5 minutes questioning me. After months of agonizing over my affair with John and sleepless nights dreading this moment, I've been discarded in under 10 minutes, all without apparent emotion. I realize I need to say something, but I must be careful. I consider how to break through Dave's reserve without losing John. A fine line. I bring up the fact that, after all our years together, he is willing to just walk away. Dave questions why I wouldn't agree to part ways, asserting that I've already emotionally left him. He wonders about the point of fighting and suggests preserving our fond memories by going separate ways. It's an answer, though not the one I was hoping for. Before I can pose another question, Dave continues, anticipating that I have papers for him to sign. Indeed, I have a signed and notarized divorce petition, but it's in John's car. We didn't anticipate progressing beyond the anticipated yelling, screaming, and possible tears tonight, let alone Dave examining or signing any papers. Before I can rise to retrieve the documents, John stands and exits. I observe him, sensing the tension affecting him as well. In the uncomfortable silence following his departure, I express my apologies to Dave, regretful for causing him pain. Dave stands up, and my eyes involuntarily glance at the bat. He dismisses my apologies, asserting that if I were truly sorry, I wouldn't have done it in the first place. He strides into the kitchen for another beer, effectively ending the conversation. Upon his return, John is back with the manila envelope, holding it at waist height. Dave takes 2 quick steps toward him. My heart goes out to John as he steps backward, tripping over his feet, hitting the edge of the couch, and landing with a soft thud. Now holding the envelope, Dave glances at me, red-faced, realizing he isn't covering himself in glory. I try to convey with my eyes that I don't care, that I love him. Turning to Dave, who watches me with an impersonal expression, I still can't read his thoughts, and I'm not entirely sure he won't attack John. I inform Dave that Mary is aware of our presence, and if she doesn't hear from us by 8, I instructed her to call the police. I add that if he wants someone to blame, he should blame me instead of directing any anger towards John. In response, Dave expresses that he does blame me, highlighting that I made numerous promises to him all those years ago, not John. He assures me that he doesn't want John to suffer any more than he's already going to. I question Dave about why John would suffer and what he means by that. Dave gives me a look, a kinder and more patient version, the kind he uses when explaining something I may not fully understand. He elaborates on the idea that, being a woman of 50, I am past the age of giving John children, making him go childless, a genetic backwater. Dave expresses his belief that there is no worse punishment for a man than never experiencing the joy of witnessing a child's first steps or hearing them say dada for the first time. He goes on to describe how John will miss out on the typical experiences of teaching a child to catch a ball, ride a bike, helping with homework, and teaching them to drive. Dave emphasizes that John will never be a hero to his daughter or a role model for his son. He speculates that our kids will likely want nothing to do with John once they discover what the two of us did. His words cause my blood to turn to ice, and I shiver, realizing I haven't considered the impact on the kids amidst the turmoil of my affair and the end of my marriage. I attempt to reassure Dave, telling him he doesn't have to tell them. Dave questions if I want him to lie to the kids as I lied to him. I hang my head, but he continues, emphasizing that John will marry someone he can never fully trust. He describes how John will be with someone capable of hurting him while professing love, someone skilled at hiding abhorrent behavior with acting skills. Dave prompts me to think about how John will feel the first time I inform him that I'm working late, going out with friends, or using the same myriad excuses I used with Dave to spend time with him. Shifting focus to me, Dave speculates about the future, when my looks start to fade in another 5 years, while John remains a trim-looking 40-year-old. He questions whether John will hesitate to leave me, having seen all my perceived flaws. Dave mentions aspects like my crankiness due to PMT, my loud snoring in deep sleep, and other habits that John will soon discover. Offended, I leap to my feet, ready to retaliate, claiming that I'm not the only one who snores and pointing out my ability to color coordinate. I start to list Dave's faults, but a gasp from John stops me. His expression shows that Dave's points are resonating. I realize I need to get John out of here. Dave shrugs while I collapse back onto the couch, shocked and filled with anger and offense. Is this truly what he thinks of me? Has he harbored these thoughts throughout all these years? Update. I have so much I want to say. After months of doing my utmost to keep my affair secret to protect Dave, I now have an overwhelming desire to make him pay for not caring, for discarding me so easily. But the words won't come. They fail me as I watch Dave take a swig of his beer before tearing open the envelope. I look down at my hands, avoiding John's gaze, and can only hope he's not looking at me either. Dave mutters about half the value of the house, looking up at me. He disputes the idea, asserting that it was his before he even met me. Dave suggests I might get away with half the bank account, but there may not be as much in there as I think. He acknowledges the likelihood of splitting the difference in our retirement accounts at the date of our separation, but mentions that I won't receive anything until he retires in 17 years. As he reads the rest of the document, he falls silent. I contemplate whether John's love for me can overcome the fact that we won't have the financial stability we thought we'd have, as I had assured him. Dave's words echo in my mind about the difference between an artist and a pizza, using John as a living example. What's the difference between an artist and a pizza? A pizza can feed a family. The silence drags on, feeling interminable. Finally, Dave looks up and comments that everything seems pretty reasonable, except for the house, anticipating that my lawyer will charge me thousands to fight that. He then shifts the focus to the immediate future, wondering what we do now. He suggests I get a lawyer, and he contemplates packing a few things, but I interject, expressing my desire for him to leave right away. Dave considers alternatives, suggesting he could drop my belongings off at John's place next weekend. He plans to change the locks in 2 days, making it impractical for me to return. He mentions that if I miss anything, I can email him. Dave declares that I can have all the pictures off the walls, excluding the ones of the kids, as we'll divide those. He emphasizes his desire for no reminders of me except for the photo of us on the cruise last year, which I can't have. I wonder what is so special about that picture that it's the only one with me that Dave wants to keep. It was taken about 3 months after I'd started my affair with John, when Dave surprised me with a short-notice cruise in the Caribbean. I didn't love John at that stage and still enjoyed sleeping with my husband, so the photo shows a woman smiling after much love. I have no idea why he wants just that one of us. While I'm musing on that, Dave turns directly to John and addresses him for the first time. He inquires about John's current address, initially mentioning 42 Belmont and then correcting himself, noting that John moved a few months ago to 58 Grevillea. The revelation leaves me shocked. Dave knew about John's new address. Not only that, but he's known for at least 4 months. I grapple with the realization, questioning when and how he found out. We've been so careful, and I can't fathom how I missed any signs. I replay scenes of dinners, closeness moments, gifts, date nights, birthdays, our anniversary, mornings, nights, days, and time with our children. Yet in not one scene could I detect a change in Dave. I look at Dave as if seeing him for the first time. This is the man I have spent my entire adult life with, the man who held my hand and encouraged me while I gave birth to our children, the man who I nursed through influenza, the real one, the one where you can't lift your head off the pillow, who nursed me morning sickness and an emergency, the man I should know as well as the back of my hand, the man I should be in tune with, notice any change in. None. There's been none. I'm sure of it. I stare at him, marveling. A stranger. My husband of 28 years is a stranger to me. I've been thinking myself so clever, so careful, not giving anything away, such a good actress. But Dave is better, so much better. He knew and hid his knowledge from me. How could he? How could he hide it so well? If he truly loves me, he shouldn't have been able to. The thought triggers heat. I don't want to explore the logic of it. Had I truly loved him, would I have been able to hide it so well? But clearly, I didn't hide it so well. Dave knew, had known for months. I look at him, but it's not him from the here and now. It's him from a mere 2 weeks ago. I see him undressing me, gentle, loving, cherishing. A lie. He knew. I think about how hard I'd worked to respond, to hide my guilt, how careful I'd been to ensure my expression was loving and responsive. I contemplate the tears I suppressed, silently apologizing to John while reciprocating, touching, and kissing, pretending I desired to make love. The stress is present, the battle against the urge to flee, to recoil. The shame when my body betrayed my heart and climaxed. I had to resist leaping from the bed immediately after, wanting to wash Dave's scent off me. Following the act, I lay beside him, sleepless while he slept, apologetic to both men. I've lied and betrayed both. I reflect on the days and nights where similar scenes played out, my heart pounding not from love or lust, but from fear of being caught, anxiety over lies, stress over my performance, and the thought of my deception, my betrayal, being exposed, all for nothing. Dave had known. For months I've been scared, editing every word, conscious of every facial expression, nerves stretched to their limit, exhausted from hiding my betrayal and shielding Dave from hurt, keeping track of my lies. Sleepless, a mental wreck, all for nothing. Did he love me at all? Ever? How long has he been pretending? A month? 4? 15? 28 years? All those things he said to John, all those awful things, what he truly thinks of me? I look at him, and I want to cry. He's dry-eyed. It's me fighting tears. Me, Nauseous from rage and rejection, I reach for the glass of Chardonnay, wanting to douse the flames and rinse the bitterness from my mouth. It tastes sour. Dave removes the glass of wine from my hand, holding John's half-finished glass in the other. He turns and walks toward the kitchen, emphasizing the shift from ours to his kitchen. Over his shoulder, he casually instructs me to hurry, mentioning that John is already at his car. The dismissal is evident, and I turn my head to find that John has indeed left the room. He didn't wait for me, and we won't be walking out together. Update. 4 years later. Closing the magazine, I realize I can't recall a single article or ad. Probably no loss. The content is likely outdated. Checking the dates on the cover, I confirm the magazine is 3 years old. I think to myself, surely a doctor's practice as large and well patronized as this one can afford current magazines, as I return it to the stack and select another. I continue my next round of board flicking, waiting for my name to be called. When I hear Mrs. Smith, I don't react immediately. It takes a repetition for me to startle, feeling a bit foolish. Even after 4 years, I'm not used to being called Mrs. Smith instead of Mrs. Brown. I rise, heft my bag onto my shoulder, and head down the corridor to my doctor's room. The doctor greets me with, "Hello, Mrs. Smith. What can I do for you today?" I explain that I've come to have my implant replaced after 5 years. He acknowledges this, noting it's in my appointment notes, and suggests that I talk to my husband about sharing the responsibility and considering a vasectomy. He smiles, and I return the smile, responding with, "Maybe next time." I keep my face friendly and neutral, but inside I feel smug. My arguments with John about him having a vasectomy have been a battle of wills for months. Why should I continue to chemically poison my body when he can just undergo a simple procedure? It's not even an operation done in a hospital. The good doctor here could perform it, unlike the non-chemical option for me, which would be to have my tubes tied, something I've pointed out to John more than once. During our last argument over the issue, I remembered he'd said he'd had the mumps as a child. I asked him to get his seed fluid tested, thinking I could still have a win in our standoff and go off birth control if the test came up with John having a low seed fluid count. The stubborn guy refused to get tested. But I'm also stubborn, so while still churning over his harsh words, I secretly salvaged some of his seed and sent it off for testing. Oh yes, I stored it correctly. Truly. Turns out John doesn't just have a low seed fluid count. He's sterile. No seed fluid in his seed at all. None. Initially flush with victory, I intended to confront him with the results, but then common sense prevailed. I wanted a happy husband again and not a sparring partner. I wanted lovemaking, not merely the release of attraction. Somewhere I remembered the inconvenience of monthly bleeds. I like not having to deal with menstruation, so a replacement implant it is. After all, it won't be forever. Dr. Jones is saying something, and I totally miss it. I apologize and ask him to repeat. He suggests swapping my implant for the new type of contraceptive implant, explaining that it is rather fantastic. Not only does it offer contraception, but it also records my pulse at regular intervals during the day and comes with a variety of other recording tools we use for diagnostic purposes. So if you come in feeling unwell, all you have to do is pause by one of our scanners and it downloads information, and we can see what's been happening with you internally since your last visit. Real space-age stuff. Wow, I laugh. It sounds like something off Star Trek. What about side effects? I'm not going to end up the size of a barn, am I? Or grow whiskers or something? And is it like Implanon in that most women stop bleeding altogether? No, nothing like that. Less disruptive than Implanon, but with all its benefits such as stopping or at least lessening the heaviness of blood flow. Okay, sounds good. Dr. Jones turns to his monitor and clicks on one of the icons on his home screen. Oh, what? He murmurs, rubbing his neck. What the? I look at him and then the screen, wondering at his confused tone. How long did you say you've had your implant in? He asks, turning toward me. 5 years. How is that possible? Are you certain? It appears you already have a Vanguardian implanted. All your medical information has downloaded. Confused, I ask, what? The doctor explains that I must have been in within the last 18 months, since that's how long they've been approved and available. However, I protest, stating that I haven't been to a doctor in 2 years or more. He turns back to the screen, and even in profile, I can see he's gone pale. He mentions that there's information going back 4 years and questions the presence of WAV files, which are audio files. He speculates that there must be a glitch, suggesting that someone else's Vanguardian might have been accidentally linked to my patient card. However, the timeline doesn't add up, and he's perplexed by the inclusion of a Google map with a flag showing the clinic. To resolve the mix-up, the doctor suggests examining my implant on. My head is spinning as I move to the examination bench and lay down. I turn my head away as I'm a little squeamish about needles and the like. "It's definitely a Vanguardian," he says, and I can hear the confusion in his voice. "It's the same as the ones we implant except for being a smidge longer and wider." I swivel my head and look at the doctor comparing my implant with an image on the screen. My eyes are drawn to the top of the page, Vanguardian. Seeing it written jogs a memory. I know that name. That was someone's pseudonym on the amateur writing site where Dave was reading about cheating wives. A coincidence? The rest of my appointment passes in a blur. "We'll sort this out, Mrs. Smith. There has to be some sort of crossed signal or something in your old implant. Or maybe you were part of some test group or something. I'll get our tech guys onto Vanguardian and we'll be in touch." I nod and walk back to the reception area. I pay my bill and head to my car. With my hands on the wheel, snatches of conversations from the past spill into my already overloaded head. Update. There's a clause in my contract stating they own all my research and inventions. Even if I work on something at home during my own time, I can't patent it for at least 12 months after resigning. Dave's favorite part of his work was research and innovation. It was his forte. In my mind's eye, I see Dave seated on the couch with me and John. I envision his faded jeans and casual polo shirt. I recall the shock of our meager savings when dividing assets, and his insistence on keeping the framed photo from the Caribbean cruise taken 3 months into my affair with John. Stunned, my hands dropped to my lap. I had the implant inserted weeks before that cruise, at Dave's suggestion to avoid inconvenient monthly disruptions during our vacation. I felt touched to have such a considerate husband. Looking back at the clinic, it's a different one from my previous choice. I changed doctors and clinics after separating from Dave because our old doctor, shared with Dave, was a friend of his father, and the one who inspired Dave to enter medical research. Continuing with Dr. Black would have been awkward. Dave knew about John. He must have known from the start. Somehow, he convinced Dr. Black to implant a device he developed, a Vanguardian. Mine had a GPS locator and the ability to record voice files. It seems illegal. I don't recall consenting, but I signed something. Regardless, I should sue Dr. Black. I didn't know what I was signing. He's retired and living in Brazil. Apparently his much younger wife is from there. Can he be extradited from Brazil, where German war criminals fled during World War II due to no extradition treaties? Why develop an implant with GPS and recording abilities? Surely not just to track me. My mind mulls it over, and then it hits me. Military. Yes, military. Something like that would be useful for them. I know Dave was involved in developing something for diabetic soldiers that regulated their sugar without daily injections or medication. So, a GPS locator and recorder aren't much of a leap. My mind swirls with possibilities. Around the time of our cruise, or shortly after, Dave must have quit his job. No wonder our savings were low. He had us living off it. I never checked. I used my credit card and Dave handled bills. Was the cruise photo a memento of his resignation? Dave organized the framing himself. Could it have been the scanner for the implant? Surely not. Deep inside, I know that's exactly what it was. That's why he suggested hanging it in the hall by the coat rack and why he opposed me having it. He knew I might reframe it or give it to the kids who could have discovered its true purpose. The enormity of how I've been deceived leaves me stunned. It all appears so unbelievable, like something from a Jason Bourne or James Bond movie, yet my gut insists it's true, all of it. It feels as though there's a vice tightening around my chest, making it hard to breathe. No wonder he didn't seek revenge in the divorce. He had already done it, at least financially. And I can't do anything about it. Dr. Black is likely beyond reach, and Dave, being Dave, probably secured my signature on a consent form. To make matters worse, it's been almost 4 years since Dave and I finalized our divorce. While I'll receive a portion of his retirement funds, I suspect the millions he earns from Vanguardian are funneled through corporations, and I won't see a penny. I touch my arm where the new implant lies. I can't even confide in John. Things are already shaky at home without me revealing how thoroughly my ex-husband deceived me. Now Dave lives in the Algarve, and the kids rave about his beachfront villa, though we rarely talk. In a daze, I pull into the driveway of the small, rundown cottage I share with John. I can't recall the trip home. I hope I didn't run any red lights. The last thing I need on top of today's revelations is a traffic infringement notice. On autopilot, I unlock the door and enter the lounge. John is on the couch. Chelsea, we have to talk. Only then do I notice he's holding hands with a girl who looks no older than 30, but is undeniably pregnant. She doesn't have much time left. 2 glasses of Chardonnay sit on the table in front of them.
Story 3.
My golden child brother couldn't handle that I'm more successful, so he vandalized my car out of jealousy and tried to shift the spotlight back to himself. I, 30, female, have a younger brother, Jackson, 26, male, and we do not get along, never have, never will. I guess that's why he went out of his way to try and cause trouble for me, but this time, unfortunately, it backfired on him. Part of the credit for that would go to my parents, who always treated him differently. As a young kid, it was very confusing for me because, as long as it was just me, my parents doted on me. But as soon as my brother was born, I was pushed to the sidelines, and there was nothing that I could do to bring them back to me. Believe me, I tried really hard to win them over but never had any luck. After Jackson was born, I took part in sports, stayed ahead academically, danced, sang, and acted in school plays. But nothing impressed my parents enough to pay attention to me. It was all about Jackson, which was weird because he didn't seem to be exceptionally talented at anything to me. Had he been a child prodigy, I might have even forgiven my parents for the kind of treatment I received. But he was a bratty, spoiled kid who got so used to the attention that he just couldn't stand it when anyone else was receiving it. Every time I came home with good news from school, he would find some way to make the day about him, and my parents let him get away with it as well. It was like they were blind when it came to him, and they proved me right on my 18th birthday. When I turned 18, my parents threw me a party, but in the middle of it, we received word from the cops that my brother had apparently decided to get caught while drinking with a couple of his friends. Here's the deal. All of his other friends had made a run for it, but he was the only one who had been caught. And I knew that it was on purpose. He wanted to get caught so that it would become all about him and my parents would be concerned. The worst part is that he didn't even get into trouble for it. The cops just let him off with a warning because my dad is on the force. And once my parents had brought him back home, they just reprimanded him for a bit. But they didn't even punish him by grounding him or whatever. So he totally got away with ruining my party. And that wasn't even the last time that something like this happened. At 21, when I got my first job, he decided to come home with his girlfriend and told our parents that he was engaged to her. So instead of celebrating my job, we started to celebrate his engagement, and once again the spotlight was stolen from me. I think for me personally, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I got into a huge fight with my brother and my parents that day, and instead of trying to understand me, they told me that I was being oversensitive and dramatic. After that, I never spoke to them again. My parents tried to reach out to me several times afterward, but it has been 9 years, and I still haven't spoken to them because I know that they still love my brother a lot more than they loved me. Jackson has never tried to reach out to me, and from what I know, he broke off the engagement with that girl a couple of weeks after I cut them out of my life. So all that really was just to hog the limelight so I didn't get any attention. Anyway, I'm glad that he did not try and reach out because he's a horrible human being, and I wouldn't want anything to do with him. For 9 years, we haven't spoken, but I guess he knows what I've been up to. We have all seen each other at family events and stuff, and I think my family knows that I'm doing well for myself. I drive a pretty nice car, and I always try to dress my best. Since I don't have any family of my own and I don't plan on having one anytime soon either, all my money is spent on myself. I can afford this because I'm running my own company, and it's pretty thrilling since that's what I always wanted to do. 2 years ago, when my business started taking off, I decided to buy a new house and move out of the apartment that I had been living in ever since I got my first job. I had told all my relatives not to give out my address to my family, especially not to my brother, but somehow he was able to find out about it. 6 days ago, he showed up in the evening and decided to vandalize my car. I had just come back home from work, and I was about to leave for a party again, so I hadn't bothered to park my car in the garage. And it was still out in the driveway. When I came back outside to drive to the party, I saw that somebody had spray painted my car with blood red paint, and they had said some pretty mean stuff. The sides of the car had been spray painted with a bunch of cuss words, but that did not bother me as much as what had been spray painted on the windshield. "You don't deserve any of this." I was shocked for a few minutes, trying to just process what I was seeing, and I was about to call the cops when I realized that if this was the handiwork of my brother, then there was simply no point in doing so, because if I got the cops to report my brother, my dad would just squash the entire case, and he would be let off with just a warning again. After I had processed what I had seen, I realized that the handwriting belonged to my brother, and just to be sure, I checked security footage as well. He had been wearing a hoodie, but I could just tell that it was him since he hadn't been careful enough, and I had caught a bit of his face on the cameras. When I realized that it was him, I knew that there was no point in calling the cops because my dad would deal with it, and he would get away with everything. I'm speaking from experience, not just from my 18th birthday, but also because of all the gossip that I've heard about my brother from a couple of relatives. Apparently, taking advantage of my dad's connections has become a pretty common thing for him. To be honest, I have a fair idea of why Jackson did this, since he hasn't been doing that well in life. I have heard from a couple of people that he had tried to start a business a few years back, but that had failed miserably, and he had to get help from our parents to clear all his debts. Even the jobs that he had had before, they refused to take him back. With nothing else to do, he kind of gave up on everything and just started drinking and doing drugs, and my dad knows about it. He knows about all my brother's shady dealings and is constantly trying to help him cover up and bail him out anytime he gets into trouble. I guess recently Jackson has been finding it very difficult to deal with the fact that I am successful, especially because I made it to the cover of a local magazine. And that had become the talk of the town among the family a few days back. And he's not really dealing well with it emotionally since he hasn't really grown up from when we were kids. And also because he doesn't really have anything going on for himself, and partying every weekend isn't really something worth bragging about anymore. Maybe that's why he felt like he had to go out of his way to vandalize my car and let me know that I don't deserve any of this, even though I do. It might sound mean what I'm about to say, but he also deserves what he's going through right now. He was never very hardworking or dedicated to anything. He just expected things to work out for him, and my parents always made it happen. So it isn't surprising that he's turned out like this. So, when I saw that footage, I knew that there was no point in taking it to the cops because my dad would definitely not allow Jackson to get in any sort of trouble. But I was not about to let him get away with it, since I had never even spoken to them for 9 years, but he had still decided to try and get on my nerves. After some brainstorming, I came up with the brilliant idea of posting the video on social media and leaving everyone else to deal with him. I took a bunch of photos of whatever was written on my car and posted it along with the video, claiming that it was my brother who had done it and I was sure of it. Unfortunately, I couldn't go to the cops with this information because my dad, who had spent a lifetime in the force, was going to make sure that he covered all of this up just so his darling baby did not get into trouble. Within a couple of hours, the comments started pouring in, and I had made sure to unblock my family just so they would be able to see this post. When Jackson inevitably texted me to take that post down, I just told him that I wasn't going to do that, and he couldn't even make me because if he took this up legally, he would have to prove that it was actually not him in the video, and that would require the situation to go to court. And it definitely is him in the video, so we were at a stalemate. But to be honest, he had more to lose than I did because even though he had vandalized my car and I would have to pay for it to get repainted, it really wasn't a big deal for me because I was earning enough to be able to afford it. On the other hand, if he decided to take this situation up legally in order to get me to take my post down, then he would have to try and prove that it was not him, and he had more to lose. Because if it was actually proven that it was definitely him in the video, he would be screwed. And it wasn't just about him, even my father and whoever had been helping him out, they would also get into trouble. I'm pretty sure that he hadn't seen this coming. He had probably just expected me to go to the cops and have them deal with it, and then he would have just spoken to our dad and gotten away with all of this scot-free. Unfortunately, I know my family, and he picked a fight with the wrong person this time. So after I sent that text to him, he did not even reply for a couple of days because he did not have anything to say. The post stayed up, and pretty much everyone that we know, my friends, our family members, and even our family friends, had seen that post. Finally, 2 days ago, he reached out to me once again and said that he was ready to cough up the money required for the paint job, but he just wanted me to take that post down. But for me, it was obviously not about the money. So I told him that I didn't care about the money. I wanted him to acknowledge what he had done and post a public apology. Only then would I consider taking that post down. At that point, he started pleading with me and said that he was ready to apologize in person or however else I wanted, but just not publicly. Because that would involve having to accept the fact that he had done something like this, and it would put everything at risk for him. He claimed that he would lose all his clients. I don't know what clients he's talking about because I don't think he has a business right now, but I don't care either way. So far, he had just been denying all of it whenever anyone was approaching him to ask about it, but accepting it was just going to make him look bad. But I didn't really care. I told him that this was what I wanted and he could either do it or that post would stay up. It was as simple as that for me. And he sent me a couple more messages after I told him that I was not ready to negotiate, trying to reason with me. But I didn't even bother to reply. A few hours after that, my father called me up and told me that the post that I had made was not just reflecting badly on my brother but also on him, and he had dedicated his life to his career. So he couldn't allow something like this to derail it. He requested me to take that post down, and yet again, I had to disappoint another person by declining, because if he had just not risked anything at all to protect my brother, maybe I wouldn't have anything to say against him in my post in the first place. Now his reputation was at stake, but instead of trying to convince Jackson to apologize to me publicly, my parents started yelling at me on the phone. They said that I was being ridiculous and that my success had gone to my head since I thought that I could just do whatever I wanted and get away with it. I was about to hang up on them as soon as they started yelling at me, but then my mother started crying and said that she had never expected me to behave like this. She acknowledged the fact that Jackson and I had been treated differently as kids, but she and my father had tried to contact me several times throughout the past 9 years, and yet I had never responded. So it wasn't fair for me to act like they were the villains here, even though they had tried to make amends with me a lot of times. Even now, I had no idea that they had apparently cut ties with Jackson soon after I made that post and he told them the truth, that it was indeed him. The only reason they were even speaking with him right now was because they had to get me to take that post down. But apart from that, they had no contact. They told me that they really had changed as people, but now, by not taking that post down, I was ruining my dad's reputation as well without even giving him a chance to prove that he had changed. And now I'm kind of confused because I really don't want to take that post down. At the same time, I don't understand what to do with the situation regarding my parents. So, AITA for not wanting to take down a Facebook post against my brother, even though it's ruining my dad's reputation? Update 1, hello. So, a couple of things before I move on to the update. The first being that my dad has retired from the force. He just crossed 55 recently and announced his retirement around the same time, even though it's not exactly mandatory for him right now, but he's been having a lot of problems with his heart. So he decided to take an early retirement. This happened just a couple of months ago, and I found out about it from other family members, but he still has connections with his colleagues on the force, and I know for a fact that if he wanted to, he definitely would have been able to bail my brother out. Besides, I think posting it on Facebook did a lot more damage to my brother's reputation, and that's exactly what I had wanted, so I don't really regret not calling the cops on him. I think I did the right thing. And coming to Jackson and what kind of drugs he was taking, I'm not really sure about that. All I know is that none of what he was doing was legal, not just drugs, but he's also involved in a lot of other shady things because I know for a fact that he hasn't worked since his business flopped a couple of years back. And yet he has still managed to be able to pay rent and live in an apartment of his own. Of course, it's very likely that my parents have been supporting him financially, but even then, I'm sure that they haven't been giving him money to party. And his Instagram feed is just full of pictures of him living it up with his friends. I don't know exactly what he's involved in, but I know that it can't be anything good, because if he has been able to raise money for himself without working hard, I'm pretty sure he's doing something illegal and dishonest. And my dad has been helping him cover it up. So he's not really the honest and upright cop that he has been pretending to be for everyone else. And that's why I don't see any reason for me to take that post down and protect his reputation. They did have a valid point that they had tried to contact me several times in the past couple of years, but the reason that I had never accepted their attempts to contact me was because I had always known that, for them, my brother was more of a priority than me. And even in this current situation, it was the truth. They claimed that they had cut him off but still spoke to him so they could get me to take the post down, so they didn't really cut him off. And what they said to me was pointless. I was a bit confused at the time because I was feeling a lot of mixed emotions, but after reading the comments on my post, I realized I didn't really have to take that post down. My family deserves every bit of the hate that they are getting right now. They have brought it onto themselves, And I'm not the bad guy in this situation in the slightest. So it's been 9 days now, and the post is still up. I got my car repainted already. I didn't think there was any point in waiting for my parents or my brother to cough up the money that they owed me. And besides, it was not about money for me in the first place. I think I have made that very clear. But in spite of that, my brother has not given up. Jackson keeps texting me again and again, saying that he really is sorry and he's ready to send me whatever amount I ask for. Which is just another indicator that he's definitely involved in something shady, because otherwise, where is he getting that money from, since my parents just told me that they have cut him off? I'm pretty sure they're not giving him the money. Anyway, he keeps texting me, and I just have to keep ignoring it because all I want is an apology, and a public one at that. And unless and until I get one, that post is staying up. At this point, even if I do take it down, it's going to be pretty pointless because everyone has seen it. The entire family has ostracized Jackson and my parents. Literally, not one person wants to speak to them anymore. As for whoever went to school with us, most of them have reached out to tell me that they are not surprised that Jackson turned out like this. He had always been a bit of a brat and thought that he could always get away with everything. And he could, that was true, but not this time. Unfortunately for him, the only people who have not spoken to me after that last phone call are my parents, and I genuinely have no idea what they have been up to. Truth be told, I really don't understand why it's so difficult for my family to just acknowledge and accept their mistakes and apologize for them. To me, it's a very simple and reasonable condition in my opinion, and yet they are acting as if I've asked for the world. It's really sad, but I'm not surprised that they are acting like this. They've always been this way, and I, for one, am glad that I cut them off 9 years back because they don't deserve to be a part of my life in the first place. Update 2, so my parents decided to pay me a visit today, but it was not just them who showed up. Their family lawyer came along with them. My mom's older brother, my uncle, is a pretty great attorney, but I'm not sure why exactly he decided to come along with my parents to visit and intimidate me. It was the weekend, so I was at home in the morning when they came by. When I saw them standing outside, I decided to invite them in because I was really curious about what they had to say. As soon as they were inside, my parents told me that they were there to talk about the post and said that they would be forced to file a defamation lawsuit against me if I did not take it down. I wish I could say that I felt threatened or intimidated in the slightest, but I was just amused that they thought that would scare me in any way. When they told me that they would be filing a lawsuit for defamation against me, my uncle decided to show me the paperwork for it, which had already been prepared by him. Just to show me that they were serious about this and not just bluffing to scare me. Unfortunately, even the paperwork and the presence of a lawyer didn't scare me. I just told my parents that they were free to do whatever they wanted. In fact, I didn't even understand why they felt obliged to come to my home and give me a warning before they went through with the lawsuit. They had no need to do that, and after saying that, I told them that since they had made up their mind, they were free to leave because I had also made up my mind and I was not going to go back on my word. So I was definitely not taking that post down until I had received a public apology from Jackson. But they refused to get up. They remained seated, and my dad tried to drive home the point that they were trying to make, that they were giving me a chance to avoid a lawsuit and a lot of trouble by just taking that stupid post down, and that I needed to take it seriously instead of laughing it off. When I stayed silent and did not say anything, my dad decided to slam his fist against my coffee table, and that's what really pissed me off because it's very expensive, and I did not want him to cause any damage to it. His son had already damaged my car, and I had to pay for it. I was not going to allow another one of those incidents to take place, so I told him to get out of my house, because it was very obvious that neither he nor his son were capable of having a civilized conversation and acting like decent human beings. And I had absolutely no interest in interacting with them. My uncle said nothing but pulled my dad back, and my mother tried to salvage the situation by trying to reason with me. She was trying to bargain with me, and kept saying that we could save a lot of time by just forgetting about that, and that could only happen if I deleted it. I didn't even need to forgive them or whatever, but I had had enough. I just told them that I did not want to negotiate with them. And I honestly did not believe that they had the guts to go through with the lawsuit because that would create more trouble for them than it would for me. And most importantly, the thing about defamation lawsuits is that the entire basis of the lawsuit is that it's only valid if the other person is lying. Everyone knew that I wasn't lying, so filing a lawsuit against me would only bring out their truth, and I was all for it. Then my dad started screaming and cursing at me, and I lost my temper, so I reciprocated by doing the same thing. Naturally, it turned into a shouting match soon enough, and my dad got so worked up that he started punching the wall and was eventually able to make a hole in it. My uncle had tried to stop him from doing it, but there was no point. He had been trained as a cop, and it was actually pretty scary to watch him punch a hole in my wall. But after he was done, what he did was what pissed me off even more. He took out a wad of cash from his wallet, threw it on my coffee table, and then walked out after saying that I could contact him if I needed more. It was incredibly disturbing and disrespectful to me, and it was then that I decided that I was going to have to pursue this legally. It had become very obvious to me that both my dad and Jackson are unhinged, and I don't want them around me at any point. Initially, it had just been funny to mess with them, but clearly, there's something very wrong with both of them because I can't imagine normal people behaving like this. So I had a talk with my lawyer and told him everything that had happened right from the beginning. Of course, he already knew about the incident with my car since I had posted about it online. And now we are thinking about getting a restraining order against my family. I definitely qualify for it, especially after what happened today. A lawsuit will also be particularly helpful in bringing out the truth about my family, and I think that's really necessary at this point. People should know what kind of scum I'm dealing with because they really are the worst, so I'm actually looking forward to going against them right now. Update 3. Hey. So, in my last update, I said I was going to file a lawsuit and a restraining order against my family, and I finally did that last week. The legal proceedings have started, and I only recently discovered from a couple of old-school friends that Jackson had apparently become a full-fledged drug dealer. And it wasn't even like he was selling weed to college kids. He was dealing with hard drugs and had managed to build an elite clientele for himself. Like spoiled rich trust fund brats or upper management folks from the corporate world. You know exactly the kind of people I'm talking about, and I'm actually surprised that he was able to do this, but I guess it's a good thing that he's finally found his niche. I guess that's why he was actually jealous of me because, obviously, I'm doing far better than him in life right now. I'm a successful entrepreneur, and he's a drug dealer. So even though he parties every weekend, it's nothing compared to the life I have, and nobody is really proud of him. It's going to be hard to prove that he is a dealer, but I'm sure that a bit of fair investigation will reveal everything in due course. Right now, it's just based on rumors, but I have my faith in the judicial system. And anyway, at least I received an explanation as to how he was able to maintain the kind of lifestyle that he had without any apparent source of income. So that's what's going on with my brother. And I don't think that my parents had cut him off at any point because the last time that I saw them after our court hearing, they seemed to be pretty chummy. I don't think they would have been able to patch things up so quickly, especially if my dad had been telling me the truth about cutting him out of his life. Honestly, I'm just glad that I did not give my parents a chance, and I went with my gut feeling. They are truly terrible people, and I'm just hoping that when the verdict finally comes through, it's against them. So far, it seems like it's going to be, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed. My lawyer and I are going to leave no stone unturned to make sure that they get what they deserve. I have the entire family on my side, and I also have a lot of friends who are willing to testify if it comes down to it. Even my neighbors, who had heard the wall getting punched repeatedly on the day that my father visited, are willing to testify against him. So, at least I'm going to be able to get a restraining order against them for sure, and that's still good enough for me. About the rest of it, I'll deal with it as it happens. But for now, I'm just really happy that I'm getting the kind of closure that I needed. I hadn't even realized how much pent-up anger and frustration I had within me because of my family until recently, and I don't know if this is the most productive way to deal with it or not. But at least I am dealing with it and confronting my feelings. So, I'm pretty proud of myself, and I know that this is going to work out.
Story 4.
Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. I wasn't always the cautious, overthinking person I am today. Years ago, I was the type of guy who thrived on spontaneity and believed in people's inherent honesty. But as I trudged through my 30s, a few bitter experiences began to chip away at that naive optimism. A broken trust here, a shattered dream there. It all adds up, doesn't it? Fast forward to a little over a year ago, I was navigating through the wreckage of my own marriage, piecing together the events that led to its downfall. It's strange, the clarity hindsight brings. My wife and I had grown distant, and while I suspected something was amiss, I hadn't expected the elaborate deceit that would eventually unfold. But life, as they say, waits for no one. I had to keep moving forward. Everything was a mad rush. Truly. My bosses had just acquired a much smaller company that had recently gone under. I assume they likely got a great deal from the liquidators. Despite our company's recent success and being overwhelmed with work, the management team seemed somewhat frantic to integrate the new acquisition and get things operational as smoothly as possible. To make that happen, a team of us was sent there to reorient the staff and supervise the implementation of our company's systems. In short, it was total pandemonium for a couple of weeks. There was hardly any time to plan, and nearly everything was being done on the fly. Even the upgrade of the newly acquired company's computer network, which wasn't extensive enough, was handled in a rush, with wiring being added on the spot. In a nutshell, the 10 of us were scrambling throughout the day and gathering in the hotel bar most evenings to figure out what needed to happen the next day. None of us lived more than an hour away by train, but we all stayed overnight in town due to those crucial evening meetings. A few of the team managed to go home occasionally to see their spouses and families, but whether anyone could leave depended on the day's events and what was scheduled for the next morning. Anyway, feeling pretty drained, I had been sitting in the hotel bar for about 30 minutes, waiting for the others when she walked in. Sherry was one of the tech specialists, hired from a specialist firm to assist with setting up the computer systems and training the staff. And let me tell you, I was completely taken aback when I realized who had entered the bar. Sherry bore no resemblance to the geeky figure I knew so well, the one who had been teaching the new staff how to use our systems all day. Gone were the baggy sweater, mid-calf skirt, and glasses, replaced by an enticingly short skirt and a perfectly tailored silk blouse. She didn't scan the room like most people would. Instead, Sherry simply took a seat at the bar and ordered a drink. I figured she was waiting for someone, and I couldn't help but wonder which one of my married colleagues was about to break the rules. I quickly got up from my table and moved to the stool next to Sherry. She was one of the tech specialists helping to train our newly acquired team, but tonight she looked completely different. Gone were the baggy clothes, replaced by a sharp silk blouse and a skirt that was anything but modest. When she saw me, there was a flicker of recognition, and her face shifted from annoyance to amusement. She told me she was meeting someone, John, one of the electricians who lived locally. I was surprised since I thought everyone in our company was staying at the same hotel. She winked and explained she liked to keep her personal life separate, especially when it came to work. Apparently, she preferred to keep things quiet and avoid the complications of dating coworkers. I couldn't help but tease her a little, complimenting her for being so clever at hiding her true self in the office. She laughed and admitted that most of the men she trained were more interested in her appearance than her instructions. It was a tactic she had mastered. We joked back and forth for a while, and I mentioned how surprised I was to see her like this. She teased me, saying I had probably been watching her all the way into the bar. I admitted it, how could I not? She was stunning. As we bantered, I tried to keep the mood light, even joking about my own marital status, but Sherry wasn't fazed. She winked again, suggesting that if I ever got tired of married life, I knew where to find her. After about 20 minutes, her date showed up. They left together, and I stayed behind for another drink, waiting for my colleagues. Not long later, I went to the restroom. While I was washing my hands, a man at the urinal next to me made a comment about Sherry, saying she was a pretty girl. I wasn't sure how to respond at first, but he clarified that he was talking about the woman I had been chatting with at the bar. He asked if I was in town for business, and when I said I was, he probed a bit further. After I mentioned I was married, he said something that caught me off guard. Married men should be careful when talking to pretty girls in hotel bars. He seemed to know more than he should. He told me he'd noticed a man in the corner, watching me every night I'd been at the bar. The man would even follow me to the lobby later on, lurking until after midnight. I was confused, unsure whether this guy was just some oddball or if he was trying to warn me about something. He claimed he'd seen the guy use his phone the moment I started talking to Sherry. He asked for my number and promised to explain more soon. I gave him my number, still unsure why, and went back to my seat. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was the man from the restroom. He told me to sit tight and listen closely. His story was unbelievable. He explained that while on a business trip, he'd struck up a conversation with a young woman at a hotel bar. She'd shared that she was hiding from her abusive ex-husband, who had been lurking outside the hotel. The whole story sounded strange, but something about it felt real. My new acquaintance hadn't realized that sitting at the bar wasn't exactly the best place for her to hide. If he'd been paying closer attention, he might have noticed that a darker, more secluded corner would have made more sense. But captivated by her beauty and the story she spun, he bought into her tale without question. She pointed out marks on her face and arms that made it seem like someone had recently hurt her, and he immediately believed her. Then, without warning, she claimed her husband was about to enter the bar and rushed out the back door. Fearing for her safety, he followed her and found her hiding in a hallway alcove. After some back and forth, he suggested she take a room for the night, but she refused, saying her ex might see her if she entered the lobby. Eventually, they agreed that she would take his room key and hide there while he booked her a separate room. Once she had the key, she thanked him with a hug and a kiss on the cheek before he led her to her room and returned to his own. The next morning, he didn't see her, and he shrugged off the incident, thinking it was just an old-fashioned act of kindness. He felt proud of himself for being the knight in shining armor, but the situation quickly escalated. A few days later, while unpacking his suitcase, his wife found a pair of women's underwear at the bottom of it. The fallout was immediate. Divorce papers followed, and in them, his wife claimed that he had had an affair with the woman in the hotel room that night. There were even photographs of him with the woman, entering and leaving his room, and one of them at the bar. He insisted it was all a setup. He believed his wife and her lover, who turned out to be her former boss, had orchestrated the whole thing. Although he had no proof, he was convinced they'd been seeing each other after their separation. His wife had accused him of threatening her, and he wasn't allowed near the house. Meanwhile, the other man was living in the house with her, while he was stuck with child support, alimony, and maintenance payments. When he finished venting, I asked, "What does this have to do with me?" He pointed toward the corner of the bar and asked if I was sitting at my usual table. I confirmed I was, and then he told me to look carefully at the other end of the room. There was a guy sitting in the corner, mostly hidden behind a large plant. I glanced over and saw him, though it was hard to make out who it was. "Yeah, I see him," I said. The man explained that the guy had been watching me for the past few days. He seemed suspicious and was likely part of the same setup that had ruined his life. He warned me not to get caught up in something like he had. I was skeptical, but the guy seemed genuine. He continued, saying that the man was not a guest at the hotel, but had been following me into the lobby each night and leaving around 1 a.m. I dismissed it at first, brushing it off as coincidence. "It must just be a coincidence that we've been arriving around the same time," I said. "No," he insisted. "He doesn't stay here. He leaves after 1 a.m., but I can prove it. Finish your drink, then go to the Plume of Feathers, just a short walk away. I'll bet he'll follow you inside. Stand at the bar and you'll be able to spot him in the mirror." I was confused, but intrigued. There was no way I was being watched, but something about the whole situation felt off. I told the guys I'd be back soon as I stepped out of the hotel, but halfway to the Plume of Feathers, doubts started creeping in. It felt like I might be walking right into some trap. The area was nearly deserted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I reached the pub safely, ordered a pint, and sure enough, the guy who'd been trailing me in the hotel appeared. He bought a drink, then sat at the far end of the bar, clearly positioning himself to watch me. A couple of minutes later, my phone rang. The voice on the other end was familiar. "Was I right?" he asked. I confirmed, "Yeah, he's at the end of the bar, trying not to look obvious." "Are you going to do something about it?" I didn't have a clue. "I'm not sure. What if he's planning something?" "He's not your typical thug. He's probably a college kid moonlighting for some shady PI agency. He doesn't know how to follow someone without being noticed." I agreed, but it didn't make sense. I'd never even seen him before, and this was my first time out in a while. The man on the phone was right about one thing. I wasn't the kind of guy who'd be constantly checking over my shoulder. But my red-headed colleague, he was always scanning the room, and I thought maybe he was who Sherry had come to meet. Finishing my drink, I took a winding route back to the hotel, hoping it looked like I was just out for a stroll by the river. When I got back, the guys were curious but didn't press me. We spent the rest of the evening discussing work, as if nothing had happened. Later, as I walked back to my room, I saw someone again, lurking behind the plant in the lobby. The next afternoon, my new friend called again. "You still okay?" he asked. "Yeah, but I can't figure out why he's following me." He paused, then said, "Want to know the truth?" "Yeah, and if my wife's behind this, I'm going to be furious." He promised to dig into it. There were a couple of other divorced guys working at his office, and they had a plan to confront the guy without tipping him off. Later that evening, I took a different route to the river, passing through a dark alley. I was half worried I might be walking into something dangerous. But then, I caught sight of 2 figures in the shadows. One of them whispered, "Keep going, he's about 50 yards behind you." I continued walking, trying to keep my cool, and nothing else happened until I made my way to my room again. The guy was still behind the plant, just like before. At midnight, my phone buzzed again. It was my friend. It worked, but you're not going to believe this. He talked? I asked, already dreading what I might hear. Oh yeah, and what he said, you won't believe it. He's following you every night because he's working for a local detective agency. So what's the deal? It's not about you, really. They want to know which train you take. If you go north, he's done for the night. But if you go south, he's supposed to call someone immediately. I froze. South? I live on the south coast. The guy on the phone continued. Right. But why would you take a train going north? My sister lives up that way, about a half hour from here, I explained, my gut sinking. The man's tone changed. That's bad news. Do you want the number he's supposed to call? Yeah, text it to me. I'll send it as soon as we hang up. What are you going to do? I'm going to see my sister tomorrow night, I said, already planning. Need any backup? He asked. That would be great. I have no idea what I'm walking into. Text me the train time and we'll meet you at the next station. My friends will be with me, but don't acknowledge them. They're strangers to you. It's safer that way. Really? Why? They're ex-husbands, and they don't mind taking care of business. Just give them a nod, and they'll handle whatever comes up. I wasn't sure what he meant by handle, but I got the picture. There were CCTV cameras everywhere now, and it seemed like they were ready to make sure everything went smoothly, no matter what. I didn't recognize the number my tail was supposed to contact, and given it was a mobile, it was probably untraceable anyway. The next evening, after taking a northbound train, I switched to a southbound one. My friend joined me one station down the line, telling me the kid had watched me board the northbound train before leaving the station to likely call it an early night. We didn't see the two dark figures I'd passed in the alley the night before, and my friend didn't mention them. We talked about what I might find when I got home, considering that my wife hadn't mentioned plans to go out. It seemed likely she was expecting someone. I recalled a phone call earlier that week, during which Constance had seemed distracted. She'd told me she was watching TV with the sound off, following the subtitles. It had seemed reasonable at the time, but now I was second-guessing everything, especially after hearing some strange background noise. I'd even heard her giggle, which I assumed was from a soap opera, but now I wasn't so sure. When we arrived at my home station, my friend reassured me, "Don't worry, they're already here. They came by car earlier." We headed toward my house, and for a moment, I thought he was talking to himself. Then I realized he had a Bluetooth earpiece, likely talking to the figures who were still in the shadows. He told me that Constance was alone for now, but expecting someone. He was certain because she'd opened the garage door and moved our car out into the street. It looks like her visitor plans to stay the night, he said. We spent some time window shopping in a part of town where we couldn't be seen from the street until my friend got the signal that it was go time. We made our way to the house. My friend stopped me before I did something rash, like charging in without thinking. He explained that this wasn't likely the first time Constance had had someone over, so barging in now wouldn't do much good. We needed to give them time to settle into whatever they were doing so I could gather evidence for a potential court battle. Given his experience, I trusted his judgment and waited. After about 20 minutes, my impatience took over, and I snuck up to the rear lounge window. Constance had been proud of the new curtains, but they'd shrunk after washing, leaving a gap. As I peered inside, what I saw made my stomach turn. There she was, stark without clothes, kneeling between the legs of Tony Copeland, a local council member and the prospective parliamentary candidate for the upcoming general election. He was one of the last people I would have expected her to be with, and the sight left me in disbelief. Constance had always claimed she found BJ repulsive, yet there she was, performing it. I recognized Copeland because Constance had been involved in his election campaign, though not as a die-hard supporter. Ever since, I'd wondered if their affair had started because of that campaign, or if her involvement in politics had been a result of their affair. But it was a question I'd likely never get an answer to. Before I could process everything, my friend pulled me away from the window. The last thing I saw was Constance's head bobbing up and down as Copeland tangled his hands in her hair. My anger flared, but what made it worse was the fact that Constance had always claimed to be repulsed by the very act she was now engaged in. Once we were safely out of sight of the house, my companion handed me a small video camera with a lanyard to wear around my neck. He explained that once we were inside, I needed to keep the camera focused on Constance and Copeland. If Copeland attacked me, I was to drop the camera and defend myself. The camera would still record, even if it hung from my neck. He stressed that I was not to make any threats of physical violence, no matter what. "If he comes at you, do what you need to do, but don't strike first," he said. "I'll keep this camera on both of them and you. We'll have proof you didn't initiate anything." "2 cameras?" I asked, surprised. "Yeah, I sell video equipment wholesale. Didn't I tell you?" "No, you've told me nothing about yourself. I don't even know your name." "Better that way, if things go south later on," he shrugged. After sneaking into the garage and deflating Copeland's car tires, we slipped through the fire door and into the kitchen. From there, we could clearly see and record the action in the lounge, where Copeland was now returning the favor to Constance. I had to fight every instinct not to rush in and do something I'd regret, like kicking Copeland's head in. But my companion reminded me that violent actions would only hurt my case in the long run. He warned that getting arrested would be far worse than waiting to gather evidence. Somehow, Constance didn't notice us filming from the kitchen. As we watched, Copeland grew impatient and climbed on top of Constance despite her protests. "You haven't even gotten me off yet," she complained, but Copeland ignored her, saying he couldn't hold back any longer. Their conversation made no sense, with Copeland intermittently calling her a freaking witch, and Constance repeatedly yelling, "Oh, screw." It was jarring to hear Constance, who'd never used such language before, especially during our own intimate moments. Then, a phone on the coffee table began ringing, and Copeland paused, glancing at it briefly before tossing Constance onto the couch, pulling her on top and answering the call. To my surprise, Constance didn't stop. She continued moving on top of him as he spoke. As Copeland answered, Constance gazed at herself in the mirror on the wall. Oddly, it seemed she was staring directly at me and my companion through the reflection. My stomach turned. Copeland's conversation got heated. "How did you get this number?" he barked into the phone. "I'm not making any statement to you or your paper." The conversation became increasingly absurd. Copeland grew defensive. "If you publish any of this, I'll have your job for you," he threatened. Constance froze, her eyes fixed on him, and then she looked back at the mirror, her expression changing. She wailed, "Steve, oh God, no, Steve!" The sound of her voice seemed to snap Copeland out of his mood. He shifted and saw us standing in the reflection. Panic flashed in his eyes. In an instant, he shoved Constance off him so violently that she crashed into the coffee table, knocking herself unconscious in the process. In that moment, I could see real fear in Copeland's eyes. He knew the game was up. I'm not sure if he hung up the phone or not, but the damage had already been done. I've never seen anyone get dressed so fast. Copeland pulled on his pants, found his jacket, and threw it on. My companion nudged me further into the living room, keeping the camera on Copeland as he rushed to leave. Later, I realized he'd moved us out of the kitchen to clear the way for Copeland to escape to the garage. With shoes in one hand and his underwear in the other, Copeland bolted toward the garage. I could hear him yell, "You bastards!" My companion told me to focus the camera on Constance while he followed Copeland. From the way Copeland was shouting, I figured he had discovered all 4 of his tires were flat. I heard the garage door open, and Copeland tried to drive off. Meanwhile, I moved to check on Constance, who had regained consciousness but immediately fainted again, hitting her head hard on the floor. It wasn't her night, to say the least. I knew I needed to get medical help, so I called 911 while still filming her. They told me an ambulance, and the police were already on their way, and I could hear sirens in the distance as I hung up. As I filmed, a paramedic rushed in, and my companion quietly urged me to leave. He slipped a pair of sunglasses on me and put a large hat on my head, pulling it down low. I had no idea where he'd gotten either, but he was wearing the same thing. We exited through the garage to find a TV crew and reporters waiting. Questions flew at us as my companion led me to a taxi. A man stepped in between us and the reporters, repeating, "My client has no statement to make." On the ride to the station, I turned to my companion. "So, was everything you told me a lie?" "No," he replied. "My wife set me up. Her lawyer was a jerk. You met him tonight. As for Copeland, last week a buddy of mine who runs a PI business told me Copeland had hired him to watch you. My friend didn't like the job, but he passed along the info that Copeland was interested in what you were up to. It was pretty clear what he was after once I put the pieces together." "And the press?" "Yeah, sorry about that. I wanted to end Copeland's political career. Hopefully this will also hurt his legal business. Once the media gets a hold of his past, they'll forget about you and your wife. There's plenty of dirt on him." While on the train heading north, my companion filled me in. Constance had a hairline fracture from when she hit the floor, but she was stable. He also asked if I wanted anything done to Copeland once the police finished with him. "Why?" I asked. "Well," he grinned, Copeland found out it's hard to drive with 4 flat tires. He crashed into a few parked cars before ending up in a shop window. Last I heard, the police carted him off in a van. He was still in contact with people at the scene. Copeland had attempted to drive away, but his car hit the TV crew's van and a few parked cars before colliding with a truck, which shoved him into a store window. "I wish I'd seen it," I muttered. Later, news reports revealed Copeland had panicked when he saw the media outside. He jumped in his car and tried to escape, but with 4 flat tires, it didn't go well. He crashed into multiple cars before ending up in a storefront. The media coverage focused on his attempts to flee, but it wasn't long before they shifted their attention to the more scandalous aspects of his life. On the train ride, my companion said that night would likely be the last time we saw each other. He apologized for the publicity, but needed something big to make the media move. Months later, I would finally understand what he meant. As our train crossed a bridge, he tossed his mobile phone out the window. "You can't reach me anymore," he said. "Keep the camera. I've got plenty more." I looked at him, confused. "What about the footage?" "It's all there on the chip. I might need it later, but your wife's face will stay out of the press. Trust me." "Who cares?" I muttered. "You do, my friend," he replied. "No man likes to see his wife's secrets spread all over the news. It's not good for the ego. It's just human nature." My companion got off the train a few stops before I did. He apologized again for the media attention and any possible fallout I might face, promising to try to minimize it, but leaving the specifics vague. Before he left, he handed me a business card for the solicitor who had been outside my house. He assured me the lawyer was trustworthy and suggested I use him if I decided to divorce and for any future legal matters. Then, as the train pulled out, that was the last time I saw him in person. However, I would hear from him again, though not directly, and see his face once more. When I arrived at my hotel, the night receptionist handed me an urgent parcel. I took it with me to the bar, planning to drown my stress in a drink. Inside the package was the original packaging for the small video camera now in my pocket, and a note instructing me not to get drunk. I was to go to my room and back up the footage on my laptop, making multiple copies and keeping the originals in different places. After downing my drink, I followed the note's instructions, copying the footage to a DVD and sending a copy to my sister while also storing one in the hotel safe. I only had a couple of blank DVDs, so I made just 2 extra copies. Curiosity led me to watch the video again before I tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I probably looked like a wreck, and everyone at the office avoided me. Around mid-morning, 2 plainclothes officers arrived and asked to speak with me privately. They told me there was some controversy over how Constance had ended up with a fractured skull. Just a hairline fracture, but still troubling. They hinted that someone had suggested I had been violent with her, though they didn't name names. It wasn't hard to guess who they meant. I showed them the video and offered them a copy. They initially asked for the original, but I refused to give it up. They settled for a DVD copy, which I made while they waited, and we chatted while the laptop burned the disc. They seemed curious about my mysterious friend, but the video cleared me of any wrongdoing. They even mentioned that Copeland might face charges for how roughly he had pushed Constance. They hinted at his less than squeaky clean reputation and advised me to watch my back, especially since Copeland was a powerful solicitor. When I mentioned Copeland's affairs, they laughed, agreeing that he was involved in much more than just cheating. They said he was unofficially on many officers' radar. They also noted that my calm attitude was unusual, but I explained that after everything had gone to hell, all you could do was laugh. It threw people off. They smiled and shook my hand before leaving. Later, I found a working phone booth and called the solicitor. He had been expecting my call and asked if I wanted to start the divorce process immediately. I told him I had no choice if I wanted to maintain any dignity. He said he'd get things started and asked if one of his staff could visit me later that day to take my and Constance's personal details. When I asked about paying him, he assured me that was already taken care of. He hinted that someone I knew, someone wealthy and not entirely legal, would be footing the bill for everything. That evening, the crew was waiting for me in the hotel bar, eager to hear about the events from the night before. By then, they'd already seen the newspapers. It was strange, though, how I hadn't seen any papers around the office that morning. Just hours before, they had been all over the place. I gave them a quick rundown. I came home and caught Constance in bed with Tony Copeland. They asked about the press coverage, but I honestly had no idea how it had all blown up. I wasn't involved in any of it, and I made sure they knew that. Around 9 p.m., my new solicitor's assistant, a sharp but stunning woman named Miss Clarkson, arrived at the hotel. We went to the library for privacy. She wasted no time getting into business. First, she told me she had already spoken with Constance and advised her to get her own lawyer once she was out of the hospital. "Your wife doesn't want a divorce, you know?" she added. I showed her the text Constance had sent me that day as proof of her mixed signals. Miss Clarkson also explained that Copeland had been pursuing Constance for some time, although she claimed they only slept together recently. "In my experience," she said, "people are often less than truthful when it suits them." I pointed out that Copeland wouldn't have had someone tailing me unless he thought he'd get a chance with Constance. She corrected me, saying screw was probably the word I meant to use. I laughed and told her to call me Steve. She insisted on calling me Mr. Marshall, though, citing her formalities. She quickly got to work, pulling out a sheet of questions, already filled out with most of the answers. Constance and I's full names, wedding details, and the value of our house were all listed, except for the details of our bank accounts and savings, which I couldn't recall. Then she handed me a contract to sign, granting her firm the authority to handle my divorce and any related legal matters. Before she left, she suggested I call Constance. I made it clear that I had no intention of forgiving her, but I agreed to reach out. She also mentioned that Constance would be staying at her sister June's place. "The press is staking out your house," she said. "You might want to stay somewhere else this weekend." She added that my employer was keeping my whereabouts vague, though I wondered who had arranged that. After Miss Clarkson left, the guys at the bar were eager to know about my visitor. They were taken aback that a solicitor's assistant had shown up at such a late hour, and they started questioning how much all this legal help was going to cost. I called June, Constance's sister. The conversation was short. She apologized for what had happened and hoped we could remain friends. Then she went to get Constance, calling her the silly daft cow as she left the room, pretty much summing up her feelings on the situation. A year later, I ran into June again while on my honeymoon in Malta, but that's another story. The press didn't find me until after the weekend I spent with my sister's family. They were very supportive and didn't ask for details. They'd likely seen everything in the papers already. When I returned to the hotel on Sunday night, I was served with an injunction. I didn't understand all the legal jargon, but Miss Clarkson explained that Copeland had obtained a court order preventing me from releasing any media from the evening in question, the night I caught Constance and Copeland together. I told her I hadn't released anything and didn't plan to. She reassured me that someone else had, and they were trying to embarrass Copeland. "You might be summoned before a high court judge tomorrow morning," she said, but she added, "Don't panic, we've got it covered." I asked, "What can a high court judge do to me? Send me to prison?" Miss Clarkson's response was calm. "Yes, but don't worry. We've covered all the angles." On a Monday afternoon, I found myself in the dock, facing a furious judge. I didn't speak. My team of lawyers, in their formal wigs and robes, handled all the dialogue. They told the judge that an anonymous person had possession of 2 recordings similar to mine, filmed at the same time. To my surprise, a police photographic expert confirmed that the images weren't even from my footage. The 2 pictures, somehow leaked to the national press, depicted Tony Copeland. In one, he was peering around Constance's without-clothes body with a look of surprise, and in the other, he was putting his pants on while she lay unconscious on the floor behind him. Both images were taken in a way that Constance's face was either cropped out or blurred, making her unrecognizable. The judge, initially skeptical of my claim that I didn't know who the mysterious man with me that night was, eventually accepted my lawyer's arguments. He reminded me that a court order had temporarily banned the publication of any recordings made that evening. Once the judge wrapped up, I was allowed to leave, though navigating the swarm of reporters outside was a struggle. Copeland had sought an emergency injunction, arguing that he expected privacy inside a private residence. The media fought back hard, and I suspect my lawyers helped them. When the case came before the full court, the judge dismissed the injunction, ruling that since the property was mine and Copeland wasn't a resident, he had no reasonable expectation of privacy in the common areas. Additionally, because I was involved in the recording, Copeland had no right to block it from being made public. Despite the legal battle, the press coverage of the story only grew. Every major outlet featured the images, and the sensational headlines like "Caught in the Act" and "A Coward's Retreat" painted Copeland in an unflattering light. It was clear the person who had leaked the photos was meticulous in ensuring Constance's identity stayed hidden. After the court drama, life settled back into a routine. I finished my second week at the new office, then went back to my house, only to find I couldn't stay there. I moved into a small hotel nearby. Meanwhile, Miss Clarkson contacted me to let me know Constance's lawyer had reached out. It seemed the press had found her, and she was under heavy scrutiny. The lawyer also shared that Constance wasn't seeking a divorce, but would agree to the terms I had proposed if I insisted. It seemed like she was just trying to get the whole thing over with, perhaps hoping the press would leave her alone afterward. But by the time our divorce actually came up, the media had already moved on to other stories, although it did get some coverage in the local papers. We had agreed to divide everything evenly, provided Constance admitted her affair caused our marriage's breakdown. She also agreed to testify if I pursued further legal action against Copeland. Unexpectedly, Constance's legal team asked if I would testify in her upcoming case against Copeland. Miss Clarkson explained it was likely a personal injury lawsuit, and the video would probably be enough to settle the matter out of court. I never heard anything more about it, so I assume that's what happened. The house sold pretty fast. Well, the market was in a great state at the time. Constance had already come by to grab the few things she wanted, and I put the rest into storage until I found a place I liked. But honestly, I couldn't bring myself to start looking. Staying in a hotel may not sound like much fun, but you get used to it. It's less hassle, no need to cook or clean, and it ended up being cheaper than paying a mortgage. Plus, I had free parking right in the heart of the city. Every so often, a reporter would track me down, and I didn't mind chatting with them. They didn't seem too interested in Constance or me, though. They mostly asked about my mysterious friend. Unfortunately, I didn't have anything to share. A few reporters I got along with well told me they believed there was more to Copeland's story, something that hadn't come out yet, and they thought it might involve my elusive friend. I passed their cards to Miss Clarkson. By then, though, she claimed not to know anything about the man personally. That didn't quite line up with some of her earlier comments, but she did specifically use the phrase personal knowledge. I'm not sure, but it could have been 2 or 3 months since that night. Doesn't really matter. Anyway, I was sitting at my desk like I usually did, staring at my computer screen, when my desk shook as someone hopped up onto it. I turned to my left and saw a pair of knees in gray flannel. Looking farther down, I noticed those flannel pants stretched all the way down to a pair of Nike sneakers. Moving my gaze upward, I spotted an oversized blue sweater, messy mouse-brown hair, and a pair of giant black horn-rimmed glasses. "Hey, handsome, what's a nice guy like you doing in a dump like this?" Sherry asked. "Hey, Sherry, long time no see. What are you doing around here?" I replied. Sherry explained that our company had become one of her employer's biggest clients, so she was assigned to visit once a month. She was supposed to circulate and talk to the workers in different departments, just to see if anyone had suggestions for making things easier on the job. "So, what can I do for you? Everything's fine on my end," I said. "Yeah, you'd be the first to tell them upstairs if something wasn't working out." "But no, Steve. I'm here to collect a debt." I wasn't sure what expression I had on my face, but whatever it was, it made Sherry laugh. Then she reminded me that I owed her dinner. I was taken aback, but she quickly explained that I had once told her I couldn't take her out because I was married. However, based on what she'd been reading in the papers, it seemed I was no longer married. Almost single, in fact. I feigned confusion, trying to remember the conversation from that night at the hotel bar. She wasn't buying it, and with a playful tone, she urged me to stop pretending. I kept up the act for a moment, but eventually agreed to go out. I hadn't been out in weeks, so a night out might do me some good. She wasn't picky about where to go, just somewhere simple since she had a train to catch at 9. I jokingly expressed disappointment at how early her train was, but she quickly shut me down, insisting that dinner was all she was after. As she left my desk, she told me she'd be waiting for me in reception when I was done. I watched her grin before she walked off, and for a moment, I couldn't help but appreciate her confidence. When I finally stepped off the elevator, I saw Sherry right away. Her transformation was striking. There was no missing her now. I'm sure any man who had walked through the reception area while she was waiting had noticed her, and most of them probably wished she was there for them. 2 security guards, both in their late 50s or early 60s, were clearly smitten by her. As I got closer, she excused herself from their conversation and grabbed my arm. Without skipping a beat, she asked where we were going, and I told her I needed to stop by my hotel to change first. But she was having none of that. She was in a hurry, and there was no time for detours. Her train left at 9, and we had a lot to catch up on. Reluctantly, I agreed to go with her, and one of the security guards insisted on carrying her bag. We made our way to my car. After we stashed her hold-all and briefcase in the trunk along with mine, I drove us to a pub just outside town I knew served food all day. We had a relaxed meal while we talked. Sherry didn't so much demand I speak as she encouraged me to get everything off my chest. I'm not sure what it was about her, but I felt like I could talk to Sherry, and I knew that anything I shared with her wouldn't be common gossip the next day. After I spoke, Sherry surprised me by shifting gears and getting straight to the point. She told me that I needed to make some changes in my life. The women in the office had noticed that I wasn't the same carefree person I used to be, and while they understood why, they missed the old Steve, the one who brought laughter and fun to the workplace. Sherry pointed out that for years, I had been the go-to person in the office when it came to advice, whether it was helping women pick out gifts for their partners or giving them advice about their relationships. Even some of the guys used to come to me for guidance on their marriages. She reminded me that unofficially, the women in HR told newcomers that if they had issues with any of the office gigolos and didn't want to file a formal complaint, they should come to me for a chat. But now, Sherry said, things had changed. No one seemed to talk to me anymore. I was walking around the office like I had a permanent bad mood, and people missed the old Steve who was easygoing and funny. She knew I was upset, but living in a hotel and isolating myself wasn't helping. She suggested that I get back out there, start dating again, maybe even ask some of the women in the office out. I hesitated, reminding her that she'd once told me it was a bad idea to date work colleagues. She smiled and reminded me that she had asked me out tonight, not the other way around. I finally understood her point. She said I needed to find a flat, get out more, and enjoy life again. She even joked about how she stayed away from office romances herself, but not for the reasons I might think. She didn't want to be misunderstood. I disagreed with her, of course, telling her she could never look cheap. Then she ordered her dessert, but not the most expensive one on the menu. After that, we ended up talking about Sherry's life. She was 22, which surprised me. I'd always thought she was younger, maybe 19, which now seemed a bit silly. I realized I'd known her for about a year and a half, ever since we opened the office in Wales. I hadn't really seen her as someone close to my age, partly because of how she dressed, more youthful, almost like a perpetual teenager. But that evening, when she dressed up for the young electrician in the hotel bar, I had finally seen her in a different light. After dinner, I drove her to the station for her train, and she thanked me for a great evening, saying we should do it again sometime. I must have agreed. The next day at work, I made an effort to smile more, even if it didn't come naturally at first. It seemed to work. After a couple of days, people no longer hurried to leave the break room when I entered, and those who'd been avoiding me started stopping by my desk to chat again. During lunch that day, I visited a few real estate agents and got a list of local furnished flats for rent. I wasn't quite ready to buy, but I figured renting would be a good step. If living alone didn't work out, I could always go back to the hotel. That Thursday, I received an interesting call from Miss Clarkson. She opened with an offer. "How does $250,000 sound to you, Steve?" I was confused at first, so she explained that Copeland was upset about the negative press and had something to hide. The media buzz was dying down, and now they were considering a possible alienation of affection lawsuit. Constance's legal team had likely threatened something similar, but it wasn't certain. Initially, Copeland's people had offered $50,000 to make the issue go away, but now the offer had increased to $250,000. There might even be room for more if they pushed it further. I encouraged Miss Clarkson to take the offer and squeeze them for all they could get, but I also suggested settling out of court. While Constance wasn't my favorite person, I didn't want to cause more embarrassment, especially in a public trial. She agreed, noting that the press would probably get wind of the settlement anyway. We both agreed that an undisclosed sum was as close to admitting guilt as Copeland could get, though I didn't quite say it in those words. Within a few days, Miss Clarkson informed me that I would soon receive a payout of £300,000 once I signed the necessary documents. I immediately went to her office to finalize everything. While I was there, she casually mentioned that Constance was likely planning to buy a new house, likely with cash. Miss Clarkson wasn't entirely sure what Constance had used to back her case against Copeland, but she suspected it was some sort of personal injury claim. About a week later, I found myself moving into a pretty decent apartment. Although it was farther from the office, the benefit of free parking made it worthwhile, as spaces were scarce in the area. The apartment was a one-bedroom unit with a spacious living and dining area. The kitchenette was surprisingly well equipped, and the washer and dryer were conveniently placed in the bathroom, but it was big enough that they didn't really stand out. Whether it was the money Copeland had deposited into my account or just taking Sherry's advice to heart by the end of the month, I was feeling much better. I even started joining some of the guys for a drink after work now and then. One afternoon, while showing my boss Bob and a new colleague a spreadsheet I had been working on, my computer suddenly froze and the dreaded blue screen appeared. Text started appearing one letter at a time in the corner, and I quickly realized it was Sherry messaging me. Panicking, I tried to manage the situation without causing a scene, but Bob, curious about the interruption, began typing a reply himself. Sherry confirmed our dinner plans for that evening, and the exchange ended as quickly as it had started, with my spreadsheet reappearing. Bob brushed it off, commenting that Sherry seemed like a nice girl. Our new colleague, clearly confused, asked who she was, and Bob jokingly encouraged me to stop overthinking the age difference between us. We resumed working, but half an hour later, the screen froze again, this time with a message from Sherry asking if I would join her for lunch. Bob, without missing a beat, confirmed that I'd meet her at reception. I was slightly irritated by his interference, but knew I couldn't say no. Bob insisted that I had no reason to turn down a request from a lady, reminding me that the old me would have agreed without hesitation. We got back to work, and I couldn't help but wonder if Bob was right. I soon figured out why Sherry had asked me to lunch. She brought a colleague with her, a guy who clearly had an interest in her. He wasn't too thrilled to see me there, likely disappointed to learn that Sherry and I were having dinner later, so he wouldn't be traveling back with her. Sherry did a good job of keeping her distance from him. Though I was surprised, he didn't seem to take the hint. Perhaps he thought too highly of himself, which isn't uncommon for some younger guys. Later, when Sherry wasn't around, I took the opportunity to speak to him privately in the server room. As I walked back to my floor, I realized it had been quite a while since I'd had to deal with one of the office ladies' men. When I met Sherry in reception that evening, she looked just as great as always. The security guard was kind enough to carry her bag to my car, and Sherry told me her lunch companion was new to her company but knew her from college. She also thanked me for whatever I had said to him earlier that day. Later we went shopping, though I spent more time waiting around than actually enjoying myself. After a long day of shopping, we grabbed a quick meal at a fast food place. By the time we finished, I was exhausted from all the walking. I'll admit, I did enjoy watching Sherry try on outfit after outfit, especially the skirts that seemed to get shorter with every change. It got to the point where I had to tell her. One of the skirts was bordering on inappropriate, and of course, she bought it anyway. If I'd known that earlier, I wouldn't have been so hungry when we finally sat down to eat. Over the next 6 months, my divorce was finalized, and I began adjusting to life on my own. I still hung out with some guys from the office occasionally, but most of them were younger and looking for fun. While I wasn't exactly uninterested in dating, I just couldn't find anyone who caught my attention. My regular outings with Sherry, though, became a routine. While I wouldn't call them dates, they were definitely a chance for us to talk. Sherry would tell me about her life, and I'd share bits of mine. She often teased me for not asking certain women out, thinking that if I mentioned them, I must be interested. It wasn't that I wasn't interested. It was just that dating didn't seem appealing anymore. I was starting to feel my age. One morning, as I walked to the office, a headline in the newspaper caught my eye. Copland had been arrested the day before. I bought a copy and skimmed the article, though it didn't say much due to sub judice laws. Copeland had been charged with conspiracy and perverting justice, along with a long list of others who were also arrested. Several ex-spouses had been caught up in the scandal, one of whom faced multiple perjury charges. The article mentioned that several more individuals were expected to be extradited, and that 12 divorce settlements were being reviewed due to possible fraud. It seemed that Copeland's case involved a pattern of women, including one in particular, making false claims about affairs with husbands and wives, leading to significant financial settlements. A few days later, I saw my mysterious friend again in the background of a news clip. The report confirmed that Copeland and his co-conspirators had been found guilty. The next day, Sherry showed up unexpectedly. Usually she came by on Thursdays, but it was a Tuesday. She had theater tickets in hand and immediately invited me out to dinner, followed by a show. Despite the late hour, she insisted she wouldn't miss her train, promising her dad would pick her up if necessary. Dinner and the show were great, but when we arrived at the station, we realized that there were no trains heading north until 5 a.m. Sherry cursed when she realized she'd missed the last train by a few minutes. She quickly decided that she'd just stay over at my place, claiming she'd take the sofa even though I offered her my bed. After some back and forth, I finally relented, but only after she insisted she would rather sleep on a bench at the station than force me to give up my bed. At my flat, I set up a bed for Sherry on the sofa, using an old sleeping bag I had stored in the car. While the dryer warmed it up, we had some tea, and Sherry took a more thorough look around my place. After her shower, we briefly argued again about who would sleep where. But eventually, Sherry put her foot down, threatening to return to the station if I didn't let her sleep on the sofa. After I showered and said goodnight, I went to my bedroom. Sometime in the night, I woke to find someone gently blowing in my ear. I called out, thinking it was Sherry. She responded, and I realized she had somehow ended up in my bed. I asked if she was sure about being in the wrong bed, but she just teased me about our age difference. She jokingly mentioned starting our married life on the wrong foot if I kept bringing it up. I didn't say anything more, but it was clear this was a new and unexpected turn in our relationship. It wasn't exactly a shock when Sherry didn't rush off to catch an early train the next morning. By then, I had figured out that she had planned everything with surprising efficiency. As we walked to the office, she explained that she was in town for 4 days, training a new intake of staff in the accounts department. In fact, she didn't leave until Sunday evening, and during that time, she mentioned there was an opening in her company for a position that would have someone assigned to work with me part-time. It's not full-time, she clarified. Just 3 days a week, and the hours are flexible. Perfect for juggling school runs and that sort of thing. Kids? I blurted, shocked. Of course! I'd like to have at least 2, and you'd make a great dad, Steve. Well, that's a relief. For a second, I thought you were going to say 12. I joked. That's what I love about you, she replied. You always see the funny side of things. We were on our honeymoon, in that peaceful in-between moment when you're too wired to sleep, but too exhausted for round 2. As we lay there, I couldn't help but ask, Sherry, how long had you been planning to marry me? She laughed softly. Good question, old man. You could say it all started when I saw that headline about your ex-wife in Copeland in the papers. That early? I asked, surprised. Yes, but if you want to call me devious, you might even wonder about my choice of that particular hotel for dinner with John. I had my eye on you for a while, Steve. I'm going to have to keep an eye on you, huh? Yes, old man, but don't confuse me with Constance. When I know what I want, I go for it, and I won't risk losing it. I mentioned earlier that Sherry and I ran into June on Malta, and she shared some interesting insights. June told me she had always thought Constance had a submissive side, which Copeland must have recognized and manipulated. From following the news, June believed that many of the women caught up in Copeland's divorce scheme seemed to have been under his influence in some way. I hadn't paid close attention to the details of the case, so this was new to me. Whatever it was, June continued, Copeland sure knew how to twist these women around his finger. But Constance sued him, didn't she? I pointed out. June nodded. Constance is my little sister, Steve. I've always taken care of her, and maybe that's part of the problem. I pushed her into that court case. I don't think she would have had the courage to follow through on her own. But when Copeland caved and settled out of court, that was a relief. I'm not sure how Constance would have handled facing him in court. By the way, is that your new wife? June asked, smiling as she looked at Sherry. Yes, it is. Sherry chased me down and caught me, I replied with a grin. June's smile widened. She made a very good choice.